All right, we're going to go. Good evening, everybody. Thanks for coming to your city council. Maybe it's just for the air conditioning. We're glad you're here. First thing we're going to do is call to order. Let's all turn off our cell phones, please, to avoid interrupting each other. Then I'm going to remind us that as we meet today, we are stewards of land that has been home to indigenous peoples for thousands of years. Before the arrival of the European heritage dominant culture, there were folks living here. We honor this land's ancestors as we go about our business today. Thank you. Let's all stand, please, and say the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, so what's about to happen is we're going to have a substantial urban renewal meeting. So I want to give folks who want to speak to council but don't have to sit through an urban renewal meeting to do so. I have Jody and Mike here. Mike, you're speaking to urban renewal, is that right? And Jody, you're speaking to council. Would you like to come and do that, or would you like to wait the hour? Great, come on up if you would. And I see a couple of other relative newcomers in the audience. Is anyone else here to speak to council but who just didn't get a chance to sign up? Great. All right, Jody, if you could, what would you like us to know? Yep. Yep. Maybe you can prop it against like the screen or something. Seems pretty good. And touch the red disc and make it be green if you would, on the rim. There it is. All right, you're on.
Okay. Not sure if that's working. Okay, I'm Jody Bear. I live and work here in Hood River. I am speaking regarding a complaint filed on 7/25/23 on the phase 2 downtown water quality portion of the city's waterfront stormline project. Bill Weiler and myself both spoke on this topic at the July 24th City Council public comment period, starting at roughly 27 minutes into the City Council's recorded session. My intention has always been to get this project designed and built in the best interests of the citizens of the city of Hood River, the rest of the human population, and planet Earth. The project is way off track and needs your attention. I have been told that all of you have received the city and OSBIL's complaint documents with all 30 attachments. I have not received any communication from city staff since submitting the documents. Today's temperature topped out at 109, and we have several more days of this current heat wave. This is minor to what other humans on this planet are already facing, and nothing in comparison to what we will be facing soon. We are in a climate emergency and must act now while the opportunity exists to make change before all our resources are absorbed by the emergency. I am committed to implementing climate action projects that can be replicated by our sister cities in the Gorge and elsewhere to cool the planet one microclimate at a time. In this way, we can shift the current planetary feedback loops from fast-track warming to fast-track cooling loops. We can refreeze the Arctic, and we must act now. I am standing here alone, but I am not alone. Many fellow Hood Riverans are following my testimony, reading the documents, listening to the council sessions, and are already starting to share their voices and words directly with you. This will continue as we build our collective voice for benefit of the children and their children. We are asking you to ensure this project is designed and built in the best interests of the citizens of the city of Hood River, the rest of the human population, and planet Earth. We need your assistance to make it happen. Please let me know when you're going to discuss this topic so that we can listen and provide productive feedback. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Jody. All right, moving on. The next order of business is I will recess the city council.
I wanted to give you this.
Can you give it to staff, please? Thank you. Recess city council so that we may conduct urban renewal. So we stand in recess.
Good evening, calling the Hood River Urban Renewal Agency meeting of August 14th to order. Staff, is there any corrections or additions?
No, there are no additions or corrections to the URA agenda.
Okay. So we'll do business from the audience. So Mike, could you want to come up and tell us what's going on? And if you push one of those white dots, yeah.
Hello, thank you all for your time and doing the service that you do. I've seen some of you guys up here for years and it's awesome. The town appreciates it. My wife and I have operated Stonehenge for approaching 25 years and we're ready to not run Stonehenge for 25 years. We put it on the market and received a couple of offers very quickly. One of them was very impressive. A gentleman from the Pearl District sent packets along, copied to you guys. We just want to make you aware of it, that part of the urban renewal is getting the infrastructure built out, and this gentleman has the resources to participate in advance and build out some staggeringly large items, but is seeking reimbursement, which I think is what a lot of the urban renewal is about, and there are the funds available there. He's operating under a deed restriction. His name came to me through Dustin, who had mentioned that he has the resources and the capabilities to build out a project like this. He's done several. He's currently doing one in Bend and some in Medford, and he's building a large factory in, I believe, lot 2 of the Portland district for a factory that's going to do prefabs, large affordable housing, workforce housing is the correct term. I apologize. But we just want to make sure that people are aware that we had different offers from different developers that would have put the same $900,000 homes on 20 lots. That's not what we want. The middle school can't find teachers. The police force is having a hard time finding housing for the police force. People are commuting over an hour to work at these jobs, and this is a chance to get multiple units in a beautiful setting done by a conscientious builder with a really sustainable idea, a very solid business model. It's Tom Cody. It's called Magomi. Yeah, I apologize. All the information's been provided. Speaking off the cuff is not my thing. But we just want to let you guys know that we certainly encourage urban renewal to push through with Tom on this project, that we're on board with it. We don't want to go the alternate route, which is easily available to us. And we could put in 6 units for $1 million each, and that would really be snobbish. And that's not what the legacy that we want. So we just want you guys to be aware that we're supportive of it. It is a deed restricted sale, so he will only do this project, which is pretty impressive to get somebody to come along with these kind of resources, this kind of commitment. So hopefully we'll use urban renewal the way it's intended and get this project done. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks
Thanks,
for all the
Mike.
great food all these years.
And Shauna, yeah. Anyone else want to speak to the Urban Renewal Agency? All right, there's one set of minutes on the consent agenda.
Mr. Chair, I move we approve the meeting minutes from July 10th.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion by Paul and a second by Megan. Anyone want to raise any points? Seeing none, all in favor of passing the meeting minutes? Aye.
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 And-
Aye.
Thank you. Oh, good deal. Good to hear your voice, Heather. Thanks. All right, and chair says aye. Regular business items, we have one item. Staff? One very big items.
One item tonight, on pages 5 through 21 of your packet, is the next step in the Heights Phase 3 streetscape. I believe we have members from our consulting team, or a member, Nathan Polanski, joining us from Seattle. Nathan's with MIG and is leading the project team in this phase. We have a presentation for you tonight. You have some materials in your packet that's been provided that provides some of the background and overview. And before I get us out of order, I'm going to turn it over to Nathan, but we're here for questions, discussion as you have them. But
And then before we get going, what's the ask of the agency board is to continue to the next steps, I guess.
yeah, so this is really the presentation of the concept plan or the preferred concept plan as it sits. And really, this is the most, probably developed part of seeing this plan into completion. Next steps, and Nathan will review this too, will be to go on to the look at the implementation plan and some of the sequencing that goes into actually seeing this particular design get into place, including some ODOT comments. Phase 3 included 4 touch points with council. This is the second touch point, which is presenting you the outcome of the plan and all the phase documents. The next step, this is really the culmination of the design work here.
Gotcha. All right. And Nathan, you're going to present your Gantt chart probably. And we get off.
There will be a Gantt chart.
Oh, I was nervous for a second.
No.
All right. Well, thanks for the introduction, Dustin. It's great to see everybody again. And yeah, as Dustin mentioned, it's maybe less about an ask and more sort of confirmation on the direction that was provided at our meeting back in April, that we are, it looks like we expected based on conversation. So I'm going to share my screen. We'll kind of walk through where we're at.
We're
Okay.
fiddling with the volume, Nathan. We might have you do a test here in a second.
Okay. Yeah. Let me know when you're ready for me to test.
On is a good start. All right, give us a limerick.
All right. Does this volume work for everybody?
We're still fiddling.
Still fiddling. Okay.
Y'all in the audience can hear Nathan okay?
Yes, I can.
Yes.
Good, thanks.
You have to project for us.
Okay. You guys, oh, I thought you were fiddling and waiting.
Use your
Audience has
outside
got me.
voice.
Council Chambers has me. We're good.
Try
Still
again.
Try again. All right, we're here to talk about the preliminary preferred concept plan tonight, and
That's just about loud enough, in my opinion.
Don't be bashful, Nathan. Just go for it.
okay, we'll fend off the heat and talk a little bit louder. We're not quite as hot as you guys are, but it's still warm in the room. So we are, let's see. Here, plans for tonight, kind of the big chunk of this is sort of reviewing the agency feedback that we got in late April, walking through all of those kind of changes and kind of the, not necessarily changes, but kind of current direction. And then taking a look at sort of how it's all come together. As Dustin mentioned, sort of we got this preliminary look of the full study area drawn out, and kind of provide some updates on parking based on some of the changes. We did get some feedback from ODOT recently based on the materials that were shared with them back in April. So we'll kind of talk through kind of key highlights from that and then kind of where we're headed in terms of the kind of final report and implementation plan. So Gantt chart, here we are. We're in phase 3. We had our first check-in, like I mentioned, back in April to talk about the additional design studies that were requested coming out of phase 2. So here we are presenting the final concept tonight. We'll start talking about considerations for the implementation plan. And then our next session with you will be presenting a draft implementation plan likely in October, followed by a final presentation to the board at the end of the project. So I'm going to dive right into it. jumping into our key intersections that we talked about last time, the recommendation from the board was for a roundabout, and that's been incorporated into the preferred plan. The one comment that we got through the discussion that evening back in April was considerations for safety enhancements at crosswalks. And so what's shown here includes some kind of considerations for rectangular rapid flashing beacons, or RRFBs. And so these little yellow symbols here provide a way for people that are walking or biking through the intersection to hit a button and kind of turn a light on that kind of alerts drivers to know that someone's trying to cross the street. But otherwise, this looks very similar to the way it did when we met back in April, and this has now been incorporated into the final plan. Looking at the south end of the project area at 13th, 12th, and Belmont. At this intersection, the direction was to provide a traffic signal and to close Belmont between 12th and 13th to improve operations and safety at this intersection. There were some questions and sort of concerns raised regarding access to the alley and to parking that is currently accessed from Belmont Avenue, or and kind of similar to what was shown in April, and it was still there, is, you know, this Belmont would be closed at the west side, so at 13th, but it would provide a driveway curb cut to provide access to properties and parking into the alley. And so there was also a question in terms of, you know, what does Belmont become with the street closed? And, you know, I think as a part of this and kind of in previous conversations, we really envision this space as sort of a shared space that accommodates vehicles, but is really designed for people, a kind of community gathering space rather than just a street. So those were kind of what was the direction that was provided. One of the other things that the board was interested in and asked about was, what is the expected delay for people who live in the Heights to the east of 12th down near Union Street? You know, by closing Belmont, what's the travel time delay to them to coming in and out of their kind of residence and kind of properties and kind of moving beyond the Heights? And so we worked with DKS, the traffic engineer, to take a look at the traffic model and kind of identify and understand what the potential travel delay is for people, both for kind of individual users who live down in that kind of, well, I guess it'd be a kind of 10th, 11th Union area, and then also to the overall system. And so similar to the other kind of traffic analysis and results that we've talked through on previous meetings, we looked at this in terms of the PM peak hour model. And so for residents east of 12th Street, kind of down near Union, the PM peak hour has about 20 vehicles in the system. And so currently, you know, if people were to go access Belmont and turn left onto 13th and head south, if you close that street and ask people to route up to B Street to then turn left onto 13th, that red colored route would add about 45 seconds per trip for those 20 vehicles. The other kind of route that we looked at is, what if people didn't want to turn sort of midway through the Heights and preferred to go up to May Street, use that kind of future roundabout to come back south? And that trip was identified as taking an extra 2.5 plus or minus minutes to route around. So that was sort of individual delay for kind of residents. We also looked at the overall system delay. And so we're thinking about all of the traffic, not just Union Street, but also the northbound and the southbound traffic that are moving through the Heights on 13th. And the PM peak traffic model that was looked at had 850 vehicles headed northbound on 13th and about 1,000 vehicles headed southbound. With the closing of Belmont and kind of having additional vehicles, keeping Belmont open would add sort of an extra 13 seconds per vehicle. And so while that's a small time difference, the overall system delay for vehicles on 13th ends up actually being a greater systemed delay by keeping Belmont open. So that was kind of a sort of quick and I guess fairly technical recap of, what are the implications of traffic delay for residents of the Heights down near kind of 11th and Union. So I'm kind of moving on then beyond key intersections. Some of the other items that we talked about last street back in April were kind of the cross section design for 12th Street. And as a part of the kind of project team's recommendations at that time, based on goals and feedback from the community, we were looking at a cross section that had angle parking on one side of the street and a sort of relatively narrow two-way cycle track. And the feedback that we heard from the board was that, there was willingness to sacrifice some on-street parking to provide more space, a more comfortable space for people biking, and then also opportunities for kind of slightly widening the sidewalk. We had talked last time about 10-foot sidewalks are really the bare minimum that you would want on this sort of Main Street central business district type context, which is the designation in ODOT's Blueprint for Urban Design Manual. And so we've gone back to the drawing board and kind of looking at how that space can be reallocated with parallel parking on the west side of the street. We've gone back, and so the current cross section for 12th Street would increase the cycle track from 8 feet to 10 feet for two-way, which is sort of the recommended minimum width. By taking some of that additional space, we also see an opportunity to increase the buffer between the cycle track and the travel lane from what was 3 feet to 4 feet. And that allows a little bit more space and opportunity to potentially get some low plantings in. And so what we're showing here is, rather than kind of striping and a vertical post, a more more of a physical separation between the travel lane and the cycle track. One of the other things, by going from angle parking to parallel parking, we no longer have vehicles that are sort of backing out towards that space. And it's a little bit, we're not as concerned about having that kind of providing some flexibility on the hard edge. And so we're able to do that as well. And then the sidewalks were widened to kind of 12 feet plus a 6-inch curb. So we're able to sort of provide an adequate travel lane, actually a little bit wider than it was before, 13 feet, but then reallocate that space to the cycle track and to the sidewalk. One of the things we did talk about, this does come with a reduction in parking slightly. In plan view at the bottom of the screen, you'll see sort of a rendered plan for 2.5, 3 blocks, depending which side of the street you're on, from Wilson to Pine here. And one of the things that you'll see here is, we've got curb extensions along the parking side. And I don't know how well this kind of shows through at the scale you're looking at. But one of the other things that is a change from having angle parking to parallel parking is, with angle parking, you end up having larger curb extensions at the ends of the blocks, which provided more opportunities or more square footage for people to sort of reclaim, for people to gather, or for planting areas. And so one of the things is, we were looking at what are the implications of taking this revised cross section with parallel parking, is how are there opportunities, or where are there opportunities to incorporate slightly more space for people to gather and furnishing space. And so from A to Taylor, on these 3 blocks, we were thinking there's an opportunity to potentially trade 1 parking stall for slightly more sidewalk space in those areas. So similar to how downtown has used parklets in the past, and there was an interest in using parklets along 12th during COVID. These are sort of, I guess, more permanent parklets, and so they don't have to be incorporated into a final design, but we thought what would make sense is showing them as permanent curb extensions allowed for, I guess, slightly more area in the future. I think going back to the change in 12th Street, the existing conditions, I would say 1/3 of the 60-foot right-of-way was dedicated to people walking or biking, so 20 feet of that 60 feet of right-of-way. And this proposed cross section, we're sort of flipping that script, and so we end up with about 40 feet of space dedicated for people walking or biking or as buffers from vehicle areas, and only about a third of that space dedicated to vehicular space. So a very big change from the existing condition. Along 13th Street, there were no changes to the cross sections that had been presented. And so the cross sections that are kind of shown here are consistent with what we showed in April. What we did talk about are where are there opportunities for additional traffic calming along 13th Street, where are there opportunities for medians, and how do street trees come into play, curb extensions. And so here, I'll kind of walk through some of the things that we've incorporated into this kind of preliminary final concept. And that includes kind of enhanced crosswalks at Taylor and A Street. And so we're showing these with a different paving material, thinking that's a way to help highlight that for people driving, kind of showing it as dedicated or kind of separate pedestrian space. We've also got those same rectangular rapid flashing beacons to improve people stopping for people that are walking and biking across the street. And then we've also looked at the kind of opportunities for additional medians. And so you'll see, in addition to the medians that we saw kind of down near Taylor Street, where we're not, because the east-west streets are one-way streets, there's some opportunities to reduce that two-way left turn lane and have more median space that contributes to traffic calming. So we've got kind of smaller median opportunity north of Taylor, potentially a longer median between B and C streets, and then another median south of A Street. One of the things that we do want to draw attention to are between B and C Street, there are existing driveways. And so providing a median in this location would change or limit access in the future. So today, and I guess I don't know how much it would actually change access now that I say that. Today, traffic is one way. So people have to circle around the block to make sure that they're headed. If someone's heading northbound, they have to go past this driveway on 12th, come back around to access it. And so I guess to some extent, changing 13th to two-way traffic would be sort of maintaining driveway access from one direction. And one of the things that's important about is access control. And so where parcels have access from alleys or from side streets, one of the things that we'll talk about in the final concept report or kind of for future design is consider ways for access to be controlled to limit conflicts between the different users of the right of way. We also talked about east-west streets, as I mentioned, and the direction from the board was to kind of go with the team's recommendation for the alternating one-way streets that supported the key intersection travel. And so what's shown here are sort of in plan view, kind of alternating streets, westbound on Taylor, eastbound on C, westbound on B, and eastbound on A streets. One of the other things that we talked about and there was concern about were the idea of contraflow bike lanes and how to provide bike access on A Street and Taylor, which have been identified throughout this process of being important east-west connections for people walking and biking. And so A, B, and C streets are 50-foot right-of-way, so there's narrow, and it becomes harder to fit everything into the space that we have on Taylor. It is a 60-foot right-of-way. And so we took a look at, from the previous conversation that had kind of an on-street bike lane and a contraflow bike lane, looking at ways to provide more dedicated and comfortable spaces for people biking in both directions. So on Taylor Avenue, it's fairly similar, I guess, to 12th Street, is kind of providing a two-way cycle track along the north side of the street to provide that access outside of the roadway. Here you can see in the cross section, there would be a 3-foot buffer between the parked cars and the cycle track. So when people are opening their vehicle doors, they're not potentially impacting people biking. And then kind of the change from previously was angle parking on one side of the street. And so by changing to parallel, we do lose some parking stalls, and I'll go over that. But this was kind of the change to Taylor in response to the board's request to provide bike facilities outside of that roadway area. On A, B, and C streets, so A Street had previously been identified as an important east-west connection. With the closure of Belmont and the planned bike lanes along Belmont, which are sort of outside of our study area, we felt that it may be okay and appropriate to have east-west access at the south end of the heights occur on Belmont. And so A, B, and C streets all have the same cross section. And so rather than having any bike facilities on A, it is just a single travel lane with parallel parking on both sides and then wider sidewalks. So you get a 10-foot sidewalks. And so that is the change for A Street based on the discussion back in April. The other element that we talked through was the South Bike connection. And so how does that bike connection, that kind of two-way cycle track from Belmont continue south to Pacific? We talked about a couple different options, and kind of the direction was to continue to include the opportunity to narrow the existing travel lanes and coordinate that with ODOT. And so it'd be a shared use path with a landscape buffer, similar to what is happening down on Waterfront Trail along the river. So those are the kind of key elements that we talked about coming out of the additional design studies. In terms of the impact to parking, based on the revisions in response to board direction, there has been a reduction in parking from the numbers that were presented in April. Here you can kind of see in the table. So today there are district-wide, and this goes back to the parking study that we completed at the end of phase 1, between on and off-street parking stalls, there are 714 parking spaces today in the Heights. The proposed TSP, the current TSP, I guess, would reduce that to 628. When we met in April, the sort of recommendations were coming out, and we were right around, I think, 634 parking stalls. So the kind of changes that we've just walked through from April have changed that from 634 to 619. So we're now slightly less than the proposed or the current TSP parking stall that's count, but still within, 6% of that sort of estimated 24 peak summertime demand. The change in parking, so along 12th and 13th Street, parking was reduced from 80 to 72. So there are 8 stalls that came off there. That included, I think, 5 or 6 stalls, 5 stalls for the change from angle parking to parallel parking. And then I think an additional 3 for those sort of extended curb areas that I had mentioned, and kind of having opportunities for gathering. And so those don't have to be built into a plan, but as a part of the final concept, we thought it would be a good recommendation to make, and that can kind of be sorted out when the final design comes through. There was also a reduction in parking along the east-west streets from 155 to 148, so a reduction of 7 parking stalls, and 4 of those came from the change on Taylor, going from angle parking to parallel parking. And then there was sort of, as we kind of laid out curb extensions and kind of got driveways in the right spots on the final plan, I think we lost 1 additional stall on each of the A, B, and C streets. So that's where kind of the final design changes sort of impact the parking tally. So I think, bringing that all together, I think, for the first look, we've been looking at pieces of these for a year now. And so it's really exciting to kind of, for us, it was great to sort of start to figure out how to connect those dots and make sure that we were transitioning from key intersections to cross sections appropriately and how those all fit together. And so, as was shown in your packet and is shown here, it's kind of the full kind of preliminary concept plan from May Street all the way down for Belmont, through Belmont. And this shows kind of roadway channelization, sidewalk areas. We've kind of highlighted where existing driveways are. I mentioned earlier that one of the things that we'll talk more about in a final concept plan, and it's focused on implementation, is thinking about ways for access management and potentially pulling some of those driveways off of particularly 13th Street, where there might be alley access or access from an east-west street. So driveways are shown on here. We're continuing to show sort of the curb extensions, planted medians, kind of raised pavement down at the roundabout for the intersection, as well as those placemaking opportunities that we talked about back in April that kind of become opportunities with the key intersection areas. I guess the last piece that we've started to show in plan view form are street trees, and thinking through, based on kind of the cross sections that we have, the lengths of blocks and the kind of adjacent street elements, what do street trees look like? And so you can start to kind of get a sense for potential tree spacing. One of the big things, I think that's maybe a little bit different. There are much smaller trees shown along what would be the east side of 13th. And that's kind of, these are more columnar trees, given that the northbound travel lane that's right next to the curb in that area. This also shows sort of how the bike facilities sort of move through key intersections at a conceptual level and kind of make the connections either to existing facilities or planned future facilities if a two-way cycle track were to continue on May, or the a shared use path were to kind of be considered and implemented to the south down to Pacific. So I mentioned in April, Dustin had forwarded to ODOT the PowerPoint and the memo that was provided to the board back in April. And we just about a month ago, right as we were preparing your packet for this meeting, we got some feedback from ODOT. Like I mentioned, they kind of reviewed the materials that you saw, so they hadn't seen sort of a more comprehensive packet of work that's been done to date. There were also some new ODOT reviewers, so some people that were seeing content for the first time. But in general, kind of big takeaways from ODOT's review are, as we move forward and develop the concept plan, I think something to be very important is identifying a list of potential design exceptions and documenting that as part of the preferred concept and implementation plan. And that's also going to sort of be a part of the discussion in terms of the implementation and jurisdictional transfer. And if it's not an ODOT facility, you don't need a design exception for things. But compiling the list of potential design exceptions at key intersections, one of the things that ODOT mentioned is there will need to be an intersection control evaluation completed for the approval of those intersections. Coordinating with kind of the traffic engineer on our team, DKS and John Bosket, a lot of that documentation has been done at different stages. And so it's more, it should be, we're hopeful that it's more compiling that. So as the city is ready to move forward with future design projects, kind of compiling and submitting that documentation to ODOT early in the process. For the roundabout at 13th and May, ODOT, saw the significant property acquisition, which they identified and discussed as those can be risks for projects. And so the design process and the approval process for that intersection design was identified as something that will need to be worked through carefully. It was also not clear from the comments that were received as how receptive and whether ODOT would support a future roundabout at 13th and May. Another place where we got some feedback that would be challenging for ODOT approval was on the 13th Street, and so the narrower travel lanes. So that's the 3-lane cross section on 13th. We've got sort of the two-way traffic. Those 11-foot travel lanes, particularly when they're up against a curb, ODOT typically wants to see the gutter included in that. And these are things that we knew, but they were commenting on, the narrow lanes might be harder to approve. Also, this 10-foot center travel lane. They also commented that the South Bike connection to Pacific is something that they thought was an interesting idea and has some merit to explore further.
Nathan, let me jump in here. On Friday, after the packet had gone out, we got additional correspondence from ODOT. To this point, they've been involved in every phase of the project, from goal setting all the way through now. And so they're pretty versed in what's happening and what we've been looking at. Most of the exposure, though, has been through their technical teams, their engineers, their staffers, the regulators. And I expect, and we heard from ODOT, some of their project team that's a little further up in the food chain, that ODOT District 1 administration from the top levels will be submitting some written correspondence regarding our project, what they see, kind of I would take it from a more technocrat to a political analysis of it. And not to our surprise, and not to their surprise, we expect that they raise a lot of issues and focus the direction to jurisdictional transfer, really based on the acknowledgement that the plans that have been developed to this point, based on community feedback, they're kind of a round peg that needs to go in a square ODOT hole. And that is presenting, they're just willing to go in writing to let us know in order to assist setting expectations for the final report, and also to assist in providing that direction in how we phrase and how we assemble our implementation plan, which is coming next. And Nathan didn't know that was coming either. So that's we'll see how he does from here.
Okay. Thanks, Dustin. So that was kind of key takeaways from the ODOT feedback. I guess I'm going to actually flip back real quick. So that sort of takes us to the preferred concept plan. And so one of the things, back to the question at the start of this, is what is the ask of the board tonight? And I think it's confirming that the direction that the concept plan has gone, confirming that the feedback that we received in April has kind of been incorporated appropriately or accurately based on comments, and that our next step is really sort of moving forward with developing the final concept report. And so there's a few different things that we're going to be doing, elements to the final concept report. It's kind of documenting the process. So with each phase of this project, we've sort of had a executive summary that sort of covered the kind of key takeaways from each step of the way. And so we're going to sort of succinctly make sure that we kind of incorporate and kind of document that process. So that's attached to the concept. And then we'll be walking through the preferred concept. So all of the kind of elements that I'm kind of talking about very briefly tonight, and I realize we jumped into this pretty quickly without sort of a kind of much of a reminder from what we discussed in April, and I apologize for that. But we're going to be, the preferred concept is going to kind of talk through kind of the alignment with community goals. We'll be going over kind of the design overview, kind of for each of the streets, the key intersections with the key elements of the project. And then there'll be some additional elements I touched on a little bit tonight, sort of access management considerations and kind of some conversation or dialogue kind of related to kind of future driveway locations as projects are being designed. Early on, we also talked about in goal setting, and kind of community feedback. There's interest in green stormwater infrastructure to manage stormwater and kind of provide that kind of low impact development. And so we'll be looking at sort of opportunities and see how can that system get integrated into this street concept plan. And then also from a character standpoint, we asked some questions at the end of phase 2, the big community open house. We showed picture kind of precedent images and character images of different kind of furnishings and character. And so there'll be some discussion and images related to kind of streetscape character. And so that's kind of will encompass the preferred concept. And I think the important part kind of moving forward is, how does this get implemented? What are potential phasing opportunities to kind of identify bite-sized projects that can be implemented over time? I think we've talked about, and there's a clear understanding that, the key intersections are really big projects that are going to take a lot to get through in terms of funding and kind of permitting and strategy and all of that. But what are some of the other kind of project by project things that can get done? What and where are near-term safety improvements that can be done, recognizing, this has been a 2-year process, and I know there's still a need for those enhancements to crosswalks today. So talking about implementation opportunities from phasing, we have started to look at utility infrastructure below ground, going back to the urban renewal plan. Some of the projects that were identified in that were undergrounding of power. And so where does that fit into this? And so we're going back, Dustin has passed along some requests from our design team for information on existing utility infrastructure, so we can kind of help to see how that might inform where projects start and stop, or the implications of them. It would be great to understand if we know that a sanitary sewer needs to be replaced from A Street to Taylor on 13th. Taking that into consideration as we're thinking about phasing, I think will be important, so that in the future, one, it's thought about during design and it doesn't have to be re-coordinated. We've previously talked about some estimates of probable construction costs. So we're going to be refining those numbers based on where we are and accompanying that with funding strategies and grant opportunities. So kind of what are some different grants that would be appropriate for each specific project to kind of help the city have a little bit of a roadmap or kind of initial idea on how things might be able to be implemented in the future, in addition to kind of, urban renewal funds. So all of that will kind of come together in sort of a final concept report and implementation plan. And then sort of next steps. So we'll be working through those. The plan is to sort of, we're hoping that to come back in October to present that draft implementation plan. And then, as Dustin mentioned, I think another big element of this is the jurisdictional transfer discussion. And we really see this being led by the city. And so I think that's something that will kind of continue, and we'll be incorporating that information into the final report based on kind of the best available information in coordination with Dustin and NODOT as we're going. So that's
Awesome.
the presentation that we had prepared, and I will turn it over to you guys to kind of ask some questions and follow-up discussion.
Cool. Thanks, Nathan and Dustin, for jumping in. I'd like to just go around the group, and we'll start on the Zoomsters. Tim, you want to go first?
Oh, certainly, Mark. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. I guess, I think it looks good. I like it. I think that you guys have done a great job of incorporating our comments. I guess some of the things that are concerning are the ODOT comments and how we plan to address those. And I guess that's a question for Dustin.
Were you asking about ODOT? That's what you said, Tim?
Yeah, about the ODOT concerns.
Yep. I think you're going to hear this from a bunch of us, is that given the transfer is a possibility, making sure that we know that the design that we're proceeding on is going to be not squashed.
Yeah, and if you want to go around again, I also presume there will be multiple comments on this, and we'll have some points.
All right, we'll get the combined answer. Ariota.
Okay, that's great. Thanks. I guess a particular concern are the questions about the roundabout, since that seems pretty integral to the whole project, and the comment about the 10-foot center lane seemed to be problematic. So again, as Mark has indicated, we don't want to propose something that's going to be dismissed out of hand. I guess other than that, I think, like I said, I think you guys have done a great job of incorporating our comments. Yeah, I think it looks great. But then again, there are certain technical aspects of it that, it falls to the technical experts, I suppose. I guess the other thing that was a little disconcerting was the fact that the projected parking at the end of the lifespan exceeded the amount of parking that was available, and with the preferred option. Do you have any thoughts on that, Dustin?
Yeah, so I'm required or made Nathan leave in some comments below. The parking that is expected is in 17 years, your PM peak hour trips. So, it doesn't meet that. However, it doesn't take into account that if individual businesses and projects feel that they need to satisfy their own parking demands, they can build parking. This is part of it is, there's a little bit of interplay here between, community goals and public parking. And I guess, part of the agency and city council's both responsibilities is, are you comfortable with the amount of public parking sharing that amount of burden? And I think we tried to be mindful of that match, the idea of sharing the public space. It's delegated really and has to be split between a limited amount of real estate that we have, and how did we best, accommodate the needs of the businesses that don't have parking, the needs of walking public, and really trying to divvy up what limited resources we have to best serve all those needs. A safe walking space, safe accessible bicycle space, utilities and room to move, places to park, and really and still convey traffic through there without purchasing a row of businesses. And so I think through this process the process itself has been aimed at trying to find that match, without starting from greenfield scratch. How do we best accommodate what can be complementary or competing goals? And I think within 6% of a peak hour within 17 years without accommodating anything that's built offsite, I think is pretty good. I think
Also with the thought of actually trying to encourage people to get there on bike and non-motorized.
Well, and the mode shift, the mode shift is something we talked about downtown, is how do you accommodate more people downtown without building parking, is you shift the mode. And that is something that can't be done without investing in the infrastructure to do that. So better sidewalks, hopefully shift people to walk, better bicycle facilities that are accommodating to, more skill levels, those that are maybe less cavalier, hopefully shifts the mode to where people do that. And it reduces the dependency on parking. Can't guarantee that, but certainly that's some of the intent and investing in this infrastructure that the reliance on the vehicle is reduced because we invested in viable alternatives to that.
Great. Thanks, Dustin. That's all I got, Mark.
For Dustin and Nathan, is there agreement in the forecast models about the impact e-bikes are going to have? Is that something that you guys yet?
I don't think I've seen anything where the academia on e-bikes is particularly robust. I think we have an interesting scenario here. And I think even if the Institute of Transportation Engineers 10th edition puts in an e-bike curve or algorithm, I think Hood River is a particularly unique circumstance because I think e-bike costs more than vehicle. So there's a bit of there's an interesting shift here when it comes to, the philosophy of, people saying, well, if you can't afford a car, you have to be able to provide, other methods for people. I think we're looking at the world flipping upside down to where you have to drive a car. If you don't have the means for an e-bike or have time to work from home, we're looking at the car as the low, maybe the high social cost or climate cost version. But often if you don't have time, I think there's an equity statement there that, you rely on a vehicle to get from job one to job two and to drive from Hood River from a greater distance than those of us who may be privileged enough to live here. I think there's a lot built into that question of e-bikes. So,
Thanks.
Yep. But no, industry has not stepped out and said this has disrupted the science.
But I
Jim,
would say,
are we
it does-
good? Oh,
it
sorry,
does
Nathan,
open
keep going.
I was just going to add, it obviously opens the door to more people biking, where there were kind of topography challenges that might not have done it otherwise. Getting up the hill and getting up to the heights is something that can now be done by someone that doesn't have to gear down into the lowest gear of a mountain bike. So.
Elliott to May is pretty flat, so that's a big part of town. Tim, you're good. Okay, Gladys, what do you got?
Hello, Nathan, Dustin, DKS folks, everyone. Thank you so much for this incredible work. Similar to Counselor Cunahan, it's beautiful to see all this work come to fruition and that all of our comments from April were taken into consideration in this update. So really appreciate it. I love your slide decks all the time, Nathan. Side note for Abigail, it would be great if we could get these slides onto the Heights streetscape plan and just have a couple of these points interpret or translated into Spanish. I think they're really useful, especially when it's talking about, you know, the impact of parking and whatnot. So a couple points here, similar concerns to what have already been stated around ODOT. I sit here and wonder, what does it mean for jurisdictional transfer? I mean, I literally know what that means, but what is the maintenance? Like, what are the finances in taking that over? I think we should all be aware before making any sort of decision. Similar to Councillor Cunahan and the concerns about the roundabout, there's a second point in our packet that says, at this stage, it may be helpful to reference potential design modifications, oval approach that could help mitigate some of the significant impacts. So I wondered what that was going to look like, given that there's already been a preliminary concept that has been given. I'm comfortable with reduced parking. I think we want to promote public transportation. I'd rather give our friends at CAT a phone call and talk about what are some opportunities to have the pink trolley or the CAT bus that is making frequent stops at some of these locations to help our constituents when it comes to making it to work on time and whatnot. We talked about ODOT approvals. Ooh, I'd like to confirm that there are safety beacons. I think in the second slide you showed on 12th, it was highlighting Pine Street and Full Street. I didn't see any of the little safety beacons that were there. I imagine they'll be there, but I just wanted to confirm because I didn't see the little green visuals. And that one's for Nathan.
Yes. So for 12th Street, you know, kind of low volume, single lane, we weren't showing additional sort of flashing beacons on 12th. Just on 13th, we're kind of expecting higher volumes. But that's something that, you know, as we're documenting the kind of final report and kind of as design moves forward, it's something that we can mention.
Is that, so I would invite you to come to Hood River and Pine Street, specifically those corners around lunch. It is so busy, and I have seen several constituents stick their arm out, stick their leg out, just to make it very clear that folks are walking. And so I would welcome that maybe that area right there be analyzed, just because out of safety concerns, I strongly believe that there should be some additional attention that is drawn there when pedestrians are crossing. And then my last comment is around the South Bike connection. You know, there's a lot of safety concerns, especially with students riding their bikes. I work in that area, and so I get to see some of this, and it's really challenging when you have Dutch Brothers that's lined with cars, and you have students that are trying to get to school or trying to get from where they live to school. And it's really challenging in limited space. The visuals that we have here ends like right before what would be that Dutch Bros area. And so I wonder what sort of partnerships we can have with either the schools. I know that Megan Ramey is doing a lot of work. Parks and Rec just received additional dollars to complete the trail there. So I wonder if we can pool our funds together and talk about what we could do to be forward thinking, especially in that area, as there are some safety concerns for kiddos there. Besides that, that is everything for me. Thank you so much for all your work.
Thank you, Gladys. Heather, what do you got?
Hi, unfortunately, I'm not in a great spot right now. My phone's about to die, but I don't have any specific questions. I am happy to hear that it's a nice balance of parking accommodations and pedestrian accommodations and safety and beauty all kind of blended together. I think it looks really good.
Awesome. Thank you. Heather, sorry, Megan. Christy is not on.
Christy could not make it, and just for everybody's information, this would have been her last meeting, and Ben Shepherd will be joining us next month.
Oh, thanks, Heather. Thank you, Mark. Thanks, Nathan. I'm gonna follow Gladys's lead of, I know we've done one of these, and again, I agree with Gladys if I know what it means, but I don't really have a good handle on what a jurisdictional transfer of either just 12th or all of the streets in the Heights, what that looks like, what that means for the city long term, what sort of responsibilities we would be taking on. So I don't know if it's part of this or separate, like figuring out when or how to have that conversation would be useful. I think specifically with ODOT's comments, I guess I'd love to know that like some sort of timeline of how we could get to a point where we're comfortable, even if they haven't officially approved it yet, we're comfortable ODOT would go forward. Just, from our last meeting, remembering the backup if we did a light instead of the roundabout at 13th and May. I mean, it's such a critical intersection that if we can't do a roundabout, this whole thing feels like it falls apart, because I don't think the community would be supportive of backups onto Oak Street. So that just feels like a really big crux point of like, how do you start doing any of this if that might not come through? So I just want to flag that. And then I think I had two maybe small questions. So on 12th Street, Nathan, we'd moved from the, just like a small separated barrier to a vegetated buffer, which obviously is great from the bike lane perspective. I think at one point you had looked at the barrier was minimal because of potential, emergency vehicle access. Has that conversation changed, or can you speak on that?
Yeah, we've not gone back to kind of emergency services and talked with them. I think that's a great point. The lane widths are similar, and I think based on the conversation that we had when we reviewed kind of the additional design studies, it felt like this was still in the ballpark. The planted median, it doesn't have to be a full 6-inch curb. It can be a 4-inch curb. So there's different things in terms of the kind of actual design. It doesn't have to be planted the whole way. And so I think those are kind of design details in my mind to be sorted through, but I do think it would be good to confirm there are no fatal flaws from a emergency services perspective.
Awesome. I guess it'd be great to make sure that conversation is open and we're having it. And let's see. I guess this is more a comment, but also on 12th Street, I know you said it was only about 3 spaces for the, permanent parklet versus temporary parklet. And I do know, just given the concerns we've heard over the last year or two, I think having that flexibility where we could have the space if and when we need it feels better on my end, just to give some level of, not maybe I just don't want to commit, but that's, the parklet says a temporary thing have been super popular in downtown. I don't know that feels like it needs to be permanent to be successful. So I'd advocate for having those be flexible space. And I guess I will flag, we all got that letter about, vegetation loss on the stretch from Union to Pacific. Do we have an estimate of how much land we're taking from the existing sidewalk out to the east with the proposal?
I don't recall from last time. The idea was, let me see if I can pull up the previous presentation here and I can answer it. I want to say it's less than 10 feet, but I don't know offhand.
Okay, if we could get that answer at some point.
I think the vast majority of the real estate that we were working on was from the lane narrowing.
Okay.
So we were trying to borrow as little from the outside of the right of way and do a bit of a lane diet. That section has a pretty generic, I would call it a rather generic cross section to it. So I think the intent was to make sure that we had a path that could be tied into the project area. which was, really ended around Union, but that we didn't lose track of or sight of trying to tie it to the south. So the section is kind of generic. It has a retaining wall, considering there is a bunch of drop off. But I wouldn't consider it a hard and fast engineering drawing. Certainly, if we can maintain vegetation, transplant things that have been transplanted, and have a safe cross section, I think that's always, we're not going to indiscriminately go out there and cut things down if we can avoid it. So.
Okay. I think those are all my things. So thank you, Nathan. Thank you, Dustin. Thank you all.
Yeah, and I just pulled it up. It's probably about 10 feet, but as Dustin mentioned, the intent is to minimize impact to that slope, to minimize the height of a retaining wall, and to minimize impact to vegetation, any impacts that do happen, how to replant that with native plants to kind of in the planting strip and in areas that are disturbed.
Others asked mine.
First of all, thanks, Nathan, for listening to our feedback. It seems like you incorporated everything that we asked last time into this plan. So kudos on actually following through and incorporating all of our stuff. Especially would like to call out the attention to details on the street crossings, bump outs, and that sort of thing. They follow the sidewalk straight across. There's, as far as I can tell from the plans, there's not going to be any random desire paths or crossing at odd angles. So it's a really well thought out design. It's my impression. Others have asked my questions. The only one I had about the design is we have a bunch of bike routes incorporated into this plan. And this isn't a question necessarily to answer, but it's a consideration for the future. Where are these folks going to park their bikes? There's additional sidewalk spaces and whatnot that we could potentially use. There's different options there, but there was no spaces in this plan explicitly for that use. That's not something that needs to be addressed now. It would be addressed or incorporated at some point in the future. And that was it for me.
Awesome. And then from my side, I think we've covered all of the things that I really appreciate that we've seen a steady evolution, all the way from when we had the open house and we had divergent things. We've successfully stayed on task, and that's not easy, and that's wonderful. So thanks to everyone for doing that. I think the ODOT stuff is super interesting, knowing that we're not in a hole before we start. And I say that, but I'm confident that, between the relationship that we continue to build with them and the transfer possibilities that, but knowing upfront is certainly good. The last thing I want to say is,
Yeah, Paul Scarlett is from ODOT Region 1, and I don't know if he's here and has his hand up or he's going to jump in. But I think
Paul, please go ahead. Hey, good to see you.
Hello, everyone. I just want to let you know that the presentation by Nathan was great. Appreciate the conversation, the questions, and sort of wonderings about ODOT. I did meet with Ryan, or relative to JT and some other things. I met with Ryan last Friday and with Tara Lingley, who has been in touch or pretty close to this effort and coordinated well with Justin. And so we have a response that's being drafted. I'm reviewing it. And so we'll be timely about providing some feedback on the effort. Hopefully maybe by end of this week or next week, so pretty soon. And the jurisdictional conversation topic has been discussed, and our recommendation is, let's talk. Let's have some conversation sooner than later. We're open to it, and of course, a lot of details yet to come. But just wanted, since there was so much conversation, I don't want to be just a fly on the wall. I wanted to assure you that we are, of course, in coordination with you all as best as we can, and want to be responsive and be part of the process and ultimate outcome, if however we can be of help.
Thanks, Paul. And if you and your team can help us, bring this thing to reality, it's a big change, but a very important change for Hood
Right.
River. So and you can tell how serious we're taking it. So we appreciate anything you guys can do to help. So
Yep.
Yeah.
Will do.
okay, my last thing is related to the phasing discussion, Nathan and Dustin and Abigail and everyone, which is I'm afraid that if we don't set the traffic flow in the next ones of years, that future councils are going to wonder what the heck we were doing, and they're going to go back to the drawing board. So I think that we have a fairly hot iron, and I think that we need to strike it as far as setting the new traffic flow, however we can do that safely, and as soon as we possibly can. So, and property value isn't going down last time I checked in Hood River, and all those other good things. If we could keep that in mind, that would be awesome. Any other comments from anyone before we give them the go ahead for the October presentation? Not seeing anything. I think, good job.
Thank you. Again, October is our expected date to turn around some of the implementation plan and give Nathan's team some time to have those discussions. It's great that Paul came out there. In terms of ODOT, certainly we expect the letter to come through. Tara has been really on time with her communications, kind of, again, from the rank and file engineering technical level. And so, what does jurisdictional transfer mean? That conversation will be had. Certainly, we want to think about operations, maintenance, cost of transfer, current status, likelihood of this project being approved in either way. So there will be much more to come from that. And thanks for Paul for jumping in on a couple topics. We'll make good use of your time, Paul. Thank you.
You're welcome. Sorry I mispronounced your name earlier. I know who you are.
One other ODOT note I would just add is the key takeaways that we highlighted were focused on the preferred concept. So there were also the packet that was provided to ODOT back in April kind of showed both key intersections that we were looking at. And so there were other questions or concerns on the elements that are not moving forward. And it may not matter, but in terms of a signal at May also had really big concerns with ODOT with backups all the way down the hill, similar to concerns from the board. So just wanted to kind of put that into context and comprehensively kind of understand where comments came from.
Thank you all for your time, and we look forward to getting you some more information.
Got the thumbs up that you're looking for?
Yes, absolutely.
Awesome. Items from agency members. If anyone has something, raise your hand. Heather, I can't see your hand, so you have to speak up if you want to talk about something. All right, seeing and hearing none, the Urban Renewal Agency meeting is done, and back to you, Paul.
Great. We'll reopen the city council meeting at 7:14. Abigail, any agenda additions or corrections?
There are none. Thank you, Mayor.
So I saw a couple folks come in. I know that we have some folks who have already told us that they wish to speak to the West Side Urban Renewal Plan. I don't know what it says on the sheet right there. Is there anyone who's here, and the Urban Renewal Plan will be coming up pretty quickly. Is there anyone who wishes to speak to City Council not about the urban renewal, the West Side Urban Renewal? Great, we're going to carry forward then. So the next item is the Highway 30 curb ramps with ODOT. Is that you again, Mr. Paul?
Yes, thank you, Mayor.
It is us.
You might remember this has been, this is the third time we have this on your agenda. The first two were specifically about the memorandum of understanding that we're looking to work with on ODOT. But after the last meeting, talking with our city engineer, John Weber, we all felt perhaps to take a step back and review the purpose of this project and just how ODOT works with property owners. So I'm pleased that we have a number of staff here from ODOT. Thank you for being here tonight. And of course, our city engineer is in the audience. So we've got a short presentation from ODOT. I gave them 5 minutes and then an opportunity for questions from you. Depending on how tonight's conversation goes, if you feel that you've received all the information you need, then we'll put that MOU back on the consent agenda for next meeting. if there are questions that don't get answered, happy to continue the conversation. So. So with that, I think we can hand it over to ODOT staff, and it looks like they've already got their presentation up and ready.
Good evening, everyone. Could you hear me clearly? Okay,
Yes.
perfect. Thanks for inviting us to have a presentation about US 30 ADA care brands. I'm Atusa Gorg, ODOT project manager for this project. A little background about the US 30. US 30 is the historic Columbia River Highway, the first modern highway in the Pacific Northwest, first scenic highway in the US, which was constructed in 1913 to 1922 to connect the Troutdale to the Dallas. This is the primary travel route that was replaced by what is currently known as I-84. More background, US 30 was a state highway serving the main street for several communities, including the Hood River. We're talking about, there has been a lot of talk about jurisdictional transfer, but the jurisdictional transfer that I'm referring to is already jurisdictional transfer to the city of Hood River, and city of Hood River own part of the US 30 through downtown Hood River. And that jurisdictional transfer have been completed to let the city to follow the desired features such as a parklet as they plan to. As part of that jurisdictional transfer, ODOT is committed to deliver ADA care ramps as well as partial pavement of the jurisdictional transfer by December 31st of 2027. The sequence of the work is going to be first the care ramp to be constructed, and then the paving comes through to cover whatever area that is supposed to be paved. Since we were considering to take care of ADA care ramps as part of this section that is already jurisdictional transferred, we consulted with the greater effort that ODOT has to upgrade ADA care ramps along the state, not only to the city of Hood River, but this is statewide effort, and identified some other care ramps in the same corridor that requires to be upgraded as part of the ADA compliance for our care ramp. And then added those to part of the ADA US 30 care ramp project. We are constructing and upgrading the ADA ramp to ensure safe, accessible, convenient crosswalk and crossing and care ramps for folks who are sidewalk users and the people with disabilities. The ADA care ramps upgrade include more than 25,000 care ramps across the states, with 8,000 in Region 1 specifically. We also upgrade the pedestrian signals when there is a need to. The project US 30 ADA care ramps include 19 intersections. As you see, the west side is started from Mount Adams Avenue, and on the east side, we're going up to the State Street. Our schedule, currently we are at the design. We are going to the design. Our design is going to be finalized by summer 2024, and our construction begin late 24, early 25, obviously weather permitted, when sometimes some construction phases require some specific temperature or weather condition to be on it. There's not going to be any work between Memorial Day and a Labor Day in a downtown Hood River. And our impacts. As part of the construction project, every construction project has some impacts. But for this one, because we are focusing on a care ramps, we try to keep every impact as much as possible to the minimal impact. We are going to have some shoulder and lane closure at some areas. We're going to have construction on multiple corners at the time, but because we wanted to have the least disruption in one intersection, only 1 to 2 corners per intersection would be simultaneous work. There's going to be signed accessible detour for the people biking, rolling, walking. Business accesses remain open during the business hours. We're not removing any business sign as part of this project. No planter are being installed, no tree will be removed, but garbage cans might be shifted during the construction to the out of the construction area and then reinstalled back. There's not going to be any permanent changes to our bike lane, parking for the project, and we have also formal closing of 7 crossings when there were not designated to be crossings between 5th as well as the 9th Street. We have been in communication with the city, and city support those closures as well. There's not going to be any permanent closure of the existing stairways through the corridor as part of this project. Impacts to the right-of-way. The curb ramps and our work area is mainly focused on the corners that we are working to upgrade the curb ramps. Sometimes the space is limited for construction staging, and sometimes we have to chase the construction or the curb ramps a little bit back to make sure that they meet ADA compliance and accessibility for people with disabilities and all users. So there will be some temporary easement for work area behind the walk in some cases, and some permanent property right for the curb ramps would be acquired. We try to design the minimized footprint to have any impact on private properties. We work directly with each impacted party to make sure that the owner concerned would be addressed. Our right-of-way process, we are in the initial right-of-way at this point. All of the impacted parties have been notified and they have a direct point of contact. Our right-of-way agent would be available for property owner with the questions through the process. Owners will receive an offer packet with the term and just compensation information. And that was it. Hopefully I remain on time with the 5 minutes. I know that was a lot of information, but if you guys have any question, I put my contact information and also our community affairs contact information on a screen, and would be happy to respond to any question.
Thank you for that concise presentation. Good job, Atusa. I know that a main motivator for this was there was a particular corner where there's some unusual kind of creative and beautiful landscaping. The fear is that it would become blank concrete, and there was quite a lot of concern about that. Is there any more information about that situation?
Yes, we handle the right-of-way process one by one with the right-of-way, our right-of-way agent and property owners. We have been in communication. We were able to alternate the design on that corner specifically, and I would confirm we significantly reduced the impact. But because our right-of-way process is 1-1, we have our right-of-way agent to contact the property owner and explain the new situation. On the city side, also, I submitted our redesign or alternative design to the city engineer for their review and consideration as well, if they have any input or comments.
Thank you. Abigail,
Sure.
have you seen that?
I have not seen it, but I have heard from Mr. Lunding that he's pleased with the conversations that he's had with ODOT.
Great. Great.
Things are progressing along.
Other questions for ODOT? Yeah. Online, anybody? Oh, I'm sorry, Megan.
So in the presentation, you had mentioned that crosswalks between 5th and 9th were going to be closed on Oak, which was news to me. Is that all of them or some of them, or can you speak to what is closing?
Sure, I could send a follow-up documentation. We formally document. It's not going to be all of them. There are 7 specific crossing at the location that it doesn't meant to be crossing and it was not accessible. We coordinate all of the crossing proposal crosswalk closures with the former city engineer, and also with working with the new city engineer as well, and have all of those documentation. If the council would like our documentation, signed documentation, we would be happy to provide it afterward.
Abigail, can you?
Go ahead,
Yeah, and we're talking about temporary closures, I believe, for some of these. So
I saw-
part of the discussion was sequencing, not closing all of them at one time, making sure we had some routes, but we'll follow up regarding the permanents.
Okay, so there are permanent closures.
Yes, there will be some permanent closures too.
Because I mean, I guess, like when they closed a bunch of stuff on the Heights, we didn't have control because we didn't have jurisdiction, and now we do have jurisdiction. And so I'm not super excited to hear that there are crosswalks not going to be crosswalks. Especially if they're ones that are used. And I certainly think in a stretch of 4 blocks, there would be a couple. So yeah, that feels like an area we should learn more about.
All right, I'll follow up. Thank you.
Thank you.
Or actually, city engineer and I will follow up.
Anything else?
And in most of the cases, we close the crosswalks where it doesn't meant to be a crossing. We're not closing a crosswalk because it's just only going to the stairs. But we could share the documentation and obviously take any input as needed. And I think someone else has her hands up.
As you said, this is Caitlin from ODOT Community Affairs. It would be helpful if you don't mind just clicking backwards a few slides to that screenshot with the crosswalk locations, just so people can help visualize it. There we go. Just helpful. The crossings are the ones that kind of butt up into this retaining wall. So there isn't like a receiving curb ramp or receiving kind of side of the intersection. Just thought that would be helpful visual when talking about those permanent crosswalk closures.
I'm running into a tech glitch. Who was just speaking, please?
Caitlin Jackson with ODOT Region 1 Community Affairs.
Great. It just, your face didn't show up. Thank you. So I agree that this picture is of that area. It's quite an unusual thing where we have these little staircases. There are no crosswalks on the pavement that I see in this picture. So crossings versus crosswalks. Are you taking any paint off?
No, I don't believe it's removal of any paint. It's just kind of formally signing these crosswalk closures with signs that are kind of functionally closed as of today, since they do kind of walk into this wall.
And this will be temporary or permanent?
These ones are permanent. We will have temporary crossing closures while we're doing the ADA curb ramp work, and those will have signed detours.
Does that help clarify, Megan?
I think so. I'd still love to actually see the specifics.
Rand, do you have a thought on this point?
Yeah, on this specifically, you say these crossings, which are unmarked and maybe not even real crossings, that these closings will be permanent, but in the slide right here on the screen, it says no permanent closures of existing stairways. What do you mean?
There are several stairways through the corridor. We just want to make sure that folks know that we're not impacting those stairways and like a historic nature of the corridor as part of this project. So that means that if there's any crosswalk closure, that doesn't mean that like the existing stairways through the corridor would be impacted or would be closed.
So we would just have stairways to these streets.
Which is what we have now.
What we have now.
I think it's,
So,
Counselor, it's if there's a intersection on the side that you'd have a ramp, but if you were to cross the street at that point, you would run into the wall. That's what would be closed. They're not signed now, so someone could read them as open.
I don't think people are mistaking those as actual crosswalks. But, okay.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
On the sidewalk side, on the downhill side,
Right.
where we're putting a ramp, there will be, I've seen them, these silver bars to say crosswalk closed. But if I step around that and run across the street, I can walk up the staircase because that's a historic thing. Am I kind of getting it? Great. Are we all getting it? Now I understand. Thank you, Megan. You brought it up.
Opened up a can of worms there.
Okay.
And then one other question, since I was the one that brought this up, but in the actual MOU with the city for the donation of the city-owned land for this project, it's city land that gets donated to ODOT for ODOT to do the project that ODOT then gives back to the city. But then there was a part of the MOU that said if it was ever not sidewalk, it goes back to the state, even though it was originally our land. And apparently ODOT said they can't change that. And can someone speak to that?
Yes, I just sent a little bit explanation to Abigail about why this reversionary clause is just kind of mandatory for us, because in most of the cases, we use state funds or the tax gas money. And then everything that we purchase by that fund is gonna be Highway Trust Fund. And then when ODOT utilizing Highway Trust Fund, the property is gonna be under the authority of ORS 366.3592. And it's required to remain the same as a function for transportation purpose. It doesn't need to be specifically kind of like sidewalk. It does to like retain or remain for transportation purpose. The other part of it is the majority of our fund for this project come from a federal, and every time that we receive a federal dollar to our project, we have to use it for transportation purpose. Otherwise, if ODOT do not make those commitments, we have to actually pay back to the FHWA whatever value that they gave us, and that's something that is just kind of protecting ODOT every time that we purchase, and that's just some sort of standard language that we are utilizing as we move forward and making any purchases on those. But are you referring to any specific location that was city owned or?
I mean, so the MOU was for both what Saruta and I don't actually know the name of the park above the skate park. But maybe it is just the skate park. I mean, I think it's more just I get a long-term commitment and or a permanent commitment to transportation with the money, but it's, you know, the clause was if it's not being used for transportation, the state gets it. And that's what felt, and I think that's unlikely to occur, but that just felt weird that we would give you land permanently, even though it's ours. But this may just be the legal knot of stupidity. So thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. Mark.
Thanks a lot. The MOU document had very rudimentary drawings of which intersections had things, and Ms. Gorg, you offered to provide detailed drawings for us to see. If you could do that, it would be great. The reason is that we will get property owners that'll say, why are you letting ODOT do this? And my answer is, I don't know what that is, because the MOU drawing is doesn't have much detail. And so even if you're talking to the property owners, which is wonderful, and I expect that you're doing that, if you could give us those drawings prior, you know, for us to review prior to approving the MOU, I think it would be very useful.
Sure. Every time that we have the milestone, we only have that milestone so far that we shared all of our construction plan and everything detailed with the city, and request for just kind of comments from the city and implement. When former city engineer was around, we had the communication and also kind of email communication trend, as well as meeting with them to make sure that we capture all of the comments properly. And since you hired just new city engineer, we've been in kind of like a same drain and pattern with communication and just kind of like working with them closely. We could share the existing or revised construction plan in every milestone that we have. And for property owners, like if folks have any specific just kind of questions, we would be happy to walk them through, provide them any specific information that they needed. We just need to know that they request for more information. And if we know that they need more information, we definitely, the doors are open for communication and make sure that, you know, we follow whatever step that it's supposed to be. And they would be pretty much informed about like any steps in the sense of right away. And when it comes for the construction, which we are far away from that now, but like all of the impacted communities would be notified too.
And as an example, the corner of Fifth and Oak, there's a funny rectangle in the MOU on a socially important little grass hill, And the property owner there is, let's say, they're bureaucracy adverse. And so I don't know if they are giving you feedback or not. And then, but if you're going to change the hill in front of Mike's Ice Cream, it's going to have a cultural impact that city council is going to hear about very loudly. So that is an example of why, if the city has drawings, even on the private property things, we can help avoid problems, not just have our eyes closed to it.
Sure, no, that's totally makes sense. And there have been some communication. We are in some sort of revision for some of the files that the revised, we were able to just kind of customize the design to minimize the impact. And that was also one of the corners that we were able to minimize some of the right-of-way impact. The property owner would hear from us very soon about minimizing the impact to their property.
That's great. And you know, I'm not asking for schedules and dollars or anything. That's your deal. I just am trying to help the communications between property owners and the city and ODOT. Yeah.
Sure. And we appreciate your help.
Anything else, Mark? Grant?
I had the same concerns as Councilor Zandmiller, and then a related question. Are you haven't gone to design with each corner yet, and I saw in your schedule that's not due until summer of next year. Is that true for each corner that you guys are working on? You don't have a design in place? You're going to be working on designing each corner of this next year?
Design is in progress. We've already made some kind of like improvement, but is not finalized. So our design will be finalized by the next summer, next year. So it's just work in progress at the moment, but till now, all of the impacted right-of-way property owners have been notified. So if we anticipate any impact to any private or public right-of-way, we notify the impacted parties to make sure that they are on board what is coming.
Thanks.
Sure.
Gladys?
No questions for me. Thank you.
Tim?
Nothing for me, Paul, I'm sorry.
Great, thanks. Other things on this topic?
Mr. Mayor, I have a few comments when you're ready.
Great, thanks, Dan, please.
There has been a lot of heat generated over this issue, and all those comments were put in the record this afternoon, including 2 letters from a lawyer from Redmond, Washington. And all of it involves this landscaping at the corner, I think the old Butler Bank building. But it pertains to these issues generally. And so I was finally able to pin down the documents that control this, that this lawyer from Redmond was referring to. And critical for your consideration, or at least to dispel these arguments that are, as we say in the law business, wholly without merit, was your jurisdictional transfer agreement that you executed with ODOT back in August of 2020, where ODOT transferred jurisdiction for this entire segment of the historic highway to the city. But it specifically said, it said that ODOT would be coming back to redo the ramps to make them comply with ADA, as it is doing now, and would also close some of these kind of informal crosswalks, such as the one shown in this photograph, that are kind of a violation of the normal traffic engineering design standards. Since if there's an informal crosswalk here or a curb ramp, it would invite people to cross a busy street with no place to go on the other side, which is an inherently dangerous thing to do. And so ODOT and this city, in fact, endeavors to try and dissuade people from doing things like that. So these specific improvements were spelled out in this jurisdictional transfer agreement that UN executed back in the summer of 2020. And a lot of the legal arguments that were brought up pertain to this supposed historic status of the landscaping and the bench at the corner of the Butler building. Under this transfer agreement, the city as part of its, undertaking of the segment of the historic highway, was still obligated to consult with the Historic Columbia River Highway Advisory Committee on any proposed modifications to this segment of the character defining features as defined in the National Register nomination to ensure consistency along the historic Columbia River Highway corridor. So none of this vegetation, not the park bench, none of them are character defining features as defined in the National Register nomination for the Columbia River Historic Highway. That nomination was filed in February 4th, 2000. So 23 years ago, the Columbia River Historic Highway was nominated for historic designation. I'm here to tell you that the vegetation was not there, the park bench was not there, but also the Historic Act, it doesn't preserve vegetation. It preserves structures by and large. And so those were the National Historic Act, Historic Preservation Act, and also statewide Planning Goal 5, historic preservation. It doesn't apply to vegetation. There would never be any trigger for the city or ODOT to consult with the Highway Advisory Committee or to go back through historic review. The vegetation in the park bench were erected just a few years ago after the city sold the building, and it did not go through any historic review at that time. And if the arguments in this lawyer's letter are valid, then they should have gone through historic review at that time, and they didn't. So it's just kind of crazy to say that vegetation has historic preservation value. What all ODOT is doing in these ramp replacements, as originally proposed in the transfer agreement back in 2020, the permanent work is almost entirely within the current public right-of-way. And what they would negotiate with individual property owners are these temporary construction easements to give them elbow room to do the work. And that's where the vegetation was endangered and the park bench was endangered. So it all goes to design of the project. And I would advise, go talk to the project constructor, which is ODOT. ODOT has always proven itself to be super cooperative in designing its projects. It's ODOT's, I think it's ODOT's historic preservation consultant who did the nomination for the highway in the first place. So that seems to be the best place to go. That's, I think, where the solution was found. And to address Megan's concern that this land would at some point in the future not be used for right-of-way purposes, was part of the transfer agreement. The city is in charge of that kind of decision, that kind of determination. So I think if these portions along the city parks were ever to no longer be used for right-of-way purposes, it would be because the city council decided to do that. So the city council is kind of in charge of the long-term use of these rights of way. The argument that the landscaping or the park bench have some historic significance that triggers a consultation process is crazy. That I would suggest is these people have finally done is talk to the project managers at ODOT, and they'll redesign their construction elements to avoid damaging the vegetation. So my recommendation is this MOU is consistent with all of the documents and agreements that you've executed with ODOT to do this work. And it's also not a city project, and ODOT is doing what it's supposed to do under your agreement with ODOT. And it's not triggering any historic review or consultation type requirement.
Thank you, Dan. As a mild rebuttal, I will say we had 85 mayors here this weekend for the Oregon Mayors Association Conference. And you all know what they said when they walked from the library down to Mike's Ice Cream. They said, "Oh my gosh, it's so cute." So there is no motivation for us to do anything to make it less cute. So having standardized curb cuts that look like everywhere else that impact cute parts is not in our interest. So thank you for your care and concern as we move forward. And there may be modifications that need to be made at some of these intersections that comply with allowing use for people who use wheelchairs and keep it cute.
Well, I do just want to say it is in our interest to have ADA compliant downtown. So I do want to make sure we keep cute character, but absolutely, accessibility in this town does need work. So I do just want to.
Other comments on this topic?
The ADA revisions to these ramps were the result of a settlement agreement from a lawsuit against ODOT and the city of Portland. So it's not just a good idea. It's not just the statute. It's a result of a court order.
Yep. Thank you. Okay, we're gonna we listen and ask any outstanding questions. You're putting the MOU on a future agenda. Thank you, ODOT, for being here with us. Now we
Thank
have a
you.
public hearing, and I'm going to propose the following. I know a number of folks have been sitting patiently to speak to us. We're overdue for a break. I'm going to propose that public comment on the West Side plan, then a break, then council talk about it. Is that okay? So we're going to start with Kate Hoffman.
Mayor?
Yes.
This is a public hearing, so I think you have a script that
thank
you
you.
need to read and
So this
make
is
sure we've got
not
our,
public comment, but this is public comment at the public hearing.
that's right.
Stand by. So the ordinance 2077, is that the public hearing part that we're talking about?
That sounds like the right one. The city recorder is nodding.
Good. So I'm going to read the script. Thank you, Kate. An ordinance making certain determinations and findings relating to and approving the West Side Urban Renewal Plan and directing that notice of approval be published. We will now hear the city's staff report. Is that the right? Am I in order?
We can do that first, but unless you wanted to do.
Great.
How would you?
Let's skip over that. We will now take public testimony. City recorder, has anyone registered to speak? Yes, they have. Kate. Not the middle, the edge. You're doing it. You got it.
Okay, all right,
Great.
hello. Thank you all for being here to listen to public testimony about this issue. I'm here tonight, I was hoping to wing my statements, but I had a few too many points to do that off the top of my head. I'm here tonight to provide, my name is Kate Hoffman. I live at 801 Oak Street. I'm here to provide my personal testimony in favor of establishing a new West Side Urban Renewal District. I previously served on the city's Affordable Housing Task Force. And I'm currently a city planning commissioner and the planning commission representative on the Urban Renewal Advisory Committee. So through these particular lenses, I've become somewhat of a fangirl of the urban renewal funding method and process. And I thought this made sense for me to come and espouse the joys of that. I think urban renewal has a proven track record in Hood River of success, public support and engagement. Residents currently experience the great results of that process, examples being the Waterfront District and the Cascade Columbia Downtown District. One of the best parts of urban renewal is that it provides funding for priority city projects without imposing new taxes on residents. Nobody likes taxes in Oregon. Like a city savings account, it is the most straightforward way to fund essential projects that otherwise would likely be impossible with existing city funds, at least in my opinion, and the way that it's been presented in the myriad of presentations I have seen on the topic. In addition, the projects that are identified as priority projects to be funded through urban renewal are also subject to the public input process with modification opportunities through the Urban Renewal Advisory Committee, which is the Citizens Input Committee, the Urban Renewal Agency here this evening, Planning Commission, and City Council. Specifically, the Affordable Housing Strategy, which was the final result of the Affordable Housing Task Force and was adopted by the city. It identifies establishing a new urban renewal district on the west side as a high priority item for how to achieve the city's housing goals. The number one item identified by the strategy, or in the strategy by the task force, was to subsidize offsite infrastructure upgrades. That's item number A in the actual affordable housing strategy plan, the final plan. It is one of the primary objectives also of urban renewal funding. Oregon Revised Statute 457.020 is the statute that defines the necessity and purpose of urban renewal. It declares that the purpose of urban renewal, including to stimulate residential construction, specifically at lower costs and will make a more stable and larger volume of residential construction, which will assist materially in maintaining full employment. That is a quote. In our community, it's been well established that we lack financially available housing for our most vulnerable residents, who also make up a disproportionate amount of our essential workforce. Subsidizing improvements such as road connectors and water and sewer upgrades and access greatly increases opportunity for development of desperately needed diverse housing, as identified in both the affordable housing strategy and the city's housing needs analysis. Through my almost year-long now experience on the Planning Commission and the Urban Renewal Advisory Committee, or through the Planning Commission specifically, I've seen that these infrastructure items are often the things that can be the costliest to a project, and the things that also may dissuade, delay, or kill it entirely because of their cost prohibitiveness. That also includes private citizens who live in that particular area of town, who may want to make related, like housing related, or like ADU development, or other important improvements to their own properties, but are unable to do so because of the cost of required infrastructure upgrades for whatever projects they're trying to do. The other items in the affordable housing strategy identified of importance were number 2, which is item B, continued land banking, which is the city purchasing land to use for things like parks and affordable housing development, subsidized housing development. And number 7, item G, was to specifically establish an urban renewal district on the west side of the city. So establishing this district would directly meet plan item G and would radically improve the city's opportunities to purchase land as it might become available for subsidized housing projects or for parks. Item B. Ultimately, as I said previously, without this funding, many of the projects identified as priorities in the West Side District Plan, the draft as it is, would likely be impossible or require additional funding that is not guaranteed to complete the projects, like grants or other voter approved tax increases, which in my opinion makes like a real timeline for actually making progress on these projects pretty unidentifiable. I'm assuming other people probably feel that way, but that is my opinion. In summation, Hood River's done amazing things utilizing urban renewal, and I highly recommend that you adopt this district, please and thank you.
Thank you, Kim. I know that Bonnie and Claire were kind of, whichever of you would like to go first. It's an Oregon standoff. After you. Push the red thing, the edge, thing. White dot on the edge of the red circle. That's it.
I got it on the first one. But otherwise, Ms. Urban Renewal has, she's got all the quantitative stuff. I do have some comments in support of the urban renewal project that are more qualitative. I'm interested, I'm Bonnie New, address 4045 Stonegate Drive in Hood River. So I'm interested in this for several reasons. First, this is in my community, and so I care about what's going on, even if it's not in my neighborhood. Second, it is in my neighborhood. I live on the west side and I've been there for 15 years. And third, I've learned from other projects of similar scope that efforts at multi-pronged development actions hinge on dependable funding source that is equally dedicated to all of the prongs. So what we're looking at with the proposed urban renewal district is exactly that at the community level. The city's already adopted 3 plans to guide the development of the west side: the transportation system plan, the affordable housing strategy, and the multi-jurisdictional parks plan. Huge accomplishment. I look back just on the housing part. Started, at least my little piece of involvement started in 2016. So this is congratulations and thank you to the city. So the goal is to create complete neighborhoods on the west side, good housing options, multimodal transportation options, and recreation areas. So this is the kind of multi-pronged development that I was referring to. To be successful, it hinges on the dependable funding source that's equally and concurrently attentive to all the prongs. So that's what the Urban Renewal District offers, a funding mechanism that supports comprehensive planned improvements, including infrastructure, things like Kate mentioned. So the important pieces don't get left out of the process or somehow given short shrift, because the funding source turns out to be not actually that dependable, or because attention to all of the prongs is not equal or concurrent. So what happens if we miss this opportunity, if we somehow, let this one go by? Well, it's sort of like children growing up. It's going to happen whether you're paying attention or not. It's not like the growth is not going to happen. It will, and it already is. If I want my child to grow into a kind, happy, responsible, good citizen type person, I need to provide consistent, thoughtful, detailed, long-term support to get her there. So if you want development of the West Side to create complete neighborhoods that are desirable and safe and nicely livable, you've got to do the same. The city has spent the last 8 years building up the toolbox for development, the approved plans for transportation, housing, and parks. The Urban Renewal District will provide the appropriate funding mechanism to effectively pull all these pieces together. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Claire.
Okay, is it all ready to go?
It is.
Okay. My name's Claire Culbertson. I'm at 4108 Cloudview Court in Hood River on the west side. So I've been asked to speak tonight on behalf of the Aging in the Gorge Alliance. This is a grassroots organization that started in 2015 on behalf of older adults and disabled, as well as family caregivers. So as we know, within 20 years, 1 of every 5 residents of Hood River County will be at least 65 years of age. So the AGA, Aging in the Gorge Alliance, AGA, continues to advocate on behalf of older adults as they live full, enriching lives in our beautiful environment. Many older adults are very active, while others have limiting conditions. So in the past, we've helped advocate for the same items stated in the West Side Urban Renewal city adopted plans: transportation, housing, and parks. So some of our past involvement has been in the area of transportation. Several years ago, we were asked to participate in planning and advocacy on behalf of older adults for increased transportation routes throughout Hood River County. We provided a letter of support for a grant to the Oregon Department of Transportation to increase bus routes in the gorge. In terms of parks and recreation, representatives of the AGA provided input to the Portland State University urban and planning students on behalf of what infrastructure would benefit older and disabled adults' park usage: benches, paved walking trails, water fountains, adequate lighting, etc. And as Bonnie said, housing was one of our areas that we were trying to provide advocacy for. She was an instrumental voice for the Aging in the Gorge Alliance, advocating for affordable housing. So another thing that we've been involved in more recently is becoming a dementia-friendly community. There are a lot of people in our community that have memory loss. There are also people in our community that haven't been diagnosed. So we've been working with banks and fire and EMS and libraries, all of the different sectors where they may come across someone with memory loss. We also have received a age-friendly designation from AARP Oregon. So age-friendly meaning that it's a safe beautiful place for people of all ages to live. So as I said, I live on the west side. I have been involved in the West Side Plan and have been following it closely throughout the years. And I strongly support more diverse housing options as well as better roads to accommodate alternative types of travel. I live just off of Frankton, and that road is extremely narrow. There's nowhere to walk. It's very dangerous. So I certainly am in support of changing the infrastructure, building it so it's safer for everyone. And that's my testimony. Thank
Claire,
you.
very much. Mayor Kate.
Thank you. Kate McBride, 813 Marion Street. Ditto. The testimony we've had already, they expounded greatly on the same things that I'm going to talk about. I'm just going to bring it down. I'm definitely in full support of the new district. The waterfront and the Columbia Cascade districts have both exceeded the city's expectations in terms of monetary returns and enhancements of the streetscape and spurring new development. So, I mean, these are the urban renewal we've had has done great things. The construction phases are not so fun, but it's been worth it. I mean, in the end, it's definitely everything we've done so far has been worth it. I led a tour of mayors from around the state to see our downtown and waterfront areas last week, and Paul did part of the touring and I did part of the touring. And they asked a lot of questions, but I think they were very impressed with everything that we've done with our urban renewal districts. The Columbia Cascade is closed, and the waterfront district is going to close or be significantly reduced, I understand, shortly. So I think I know that it's a tax reduction for all the districts, all the taxing districts during the life of the urban renewal district. But we have two districts that have just closed or are going to close. So those are going to go back on the tax rolls for those entities. For instance, the county will receive almost $275,000 from those two districts from now on that they didn't have before. So, I mean, it kind of offsets if we have a new West Side Urban Renewal District. The library would get around $75,000 from those two districts closing to put back in their coffers, and then we would have this new district starting, and that's per year. We've had lots of citizens in the last few years that have stood up in front of city council. They've stood up in front of Parks and Rec and say, we'd like to have more parks. We need more parks. We need more connective trails for bikes and for walking and rolling. And secondly, we need more land for additional projects such as the Rand Road project, the affordable housing project at Rand Road. And congratulations on and community development partners for moving that forward this year. That's been so, it just makes my heart beat so much when I heard that was going to happen. I mean, that's just great. And I think that this urban renewal district, because it's a three-legged stool with the transportation and the infrastructure, the affordable housing and parks, that I think it's just going to be because you put all of those things together for this. I think that's really going to make it a fantastic project to do. Really the tax increment and financing for this and the specific taxing districts during the life of the urban renewal district, giving up that funding is the only way that we can replace, repair, and improve our city infrastructure and our city. I mean, that is the only tool we have as a city to be able to do those things that we've done and that we can do in the future as a city. So please approve the West Side Urban Renewal District. Thanks.
Thanks for coming down, Kate. All right, I'm going to call a brief break. And if you want to stick around and hear us talk, that's awesome. But if you hope to use everyone's time wisely. All right, we are reconvening and we will now have the staff report.
Great, thank you, Mayor. Thank you, councilors. Happy to be here to provide the staff report for the West Side Urban Renewal Plan. This has, as you can see from the agenda bill, you've had many touch points, as has the Urban Renewal Advisory Council, the agency board, and the Planning Commission has also reviewed it. So I'm joined today with Elaine Howard, who's actually in from Lincoln City, who is also going through a very similar process as they seek to create an urban renewal district as well. So I'm going to drive the slides. And I think I'll take the first couple slides, and then Elaine, please jump in as needed. So this is a slide you've seen before. As we have worked on this, we really wanted to center equity. And some of our overarching principles have been that clarity and transparency, a comprehensive vision, not looking just for right now, but also for the future, and thinking about both the positive and negative of the effects of the choices that we make. And then that commitment to equity and recognizing that some have been historically harmed and some have historically benefited, but that we want to be clear-eyed about the decisions we make and ensure that we try our best to mitigate that harm. So quick overview of today. Elaine's going to talk just a tiny bit about the role of City Council, because today you are a decider or moving on. This is not just a simple update. This is a public hearing. A little bit about how urban renewal works, which I know you all know and could teach a masterclass in, but just to review for the public, as this is kind of our big comprehensive meeting today, the district as proposed and then kind of next steps. So Elaine, can I turn it over to you?
Sure. So the role of the City Council is to hold a public hearing to gain input and to respond to any written recommendation of taxing districts and to conduct the first reading of the ordinance. So when we get to the impacts on the taxing districts, we will also talk about some of the written recommendations that have been received for your input.
So the district as proposed to you in front of you today is 406.1 acres. You might remember we started with a larger district, but based on the feedback that we received from you and from others, we have slimmed that down and really concentrated the district to the areas where we thought we could make the biggest impact. Elaine, do you want to take the next couple of slides to explain how urban renewal works?
Sure. So again, this is mostly for anyone in the audience or watching on Zoom. So in Oregon, urban renewal is limited to the growth in assessed value. And in our state, that growth is limited to 3% per year because of measures 5 and 50. The only reason that there are increased taxes above that amount are if there is substantial improvements or new construction on a property. So this baseline along the bottom is just kind of the regular growth of property tax revenues in Oregon. When an urban renewal area is formed, the assessor calculates the total assessed value of that urban renewal area. This amount is called the frozen base. That doesn't mean that property taxes are frozen. It means that the amount of taxes that are received on that total assessed value of the area at the time it's formed continue to go to all the other taxing districts, the county, the port, the city itself, over the life of the district. The difference is when there is growth within that area on the assessed value due to either the infrastructure improvements or incentives provided through the urban renewal area, the property taxes off of the growth in the assessed value goes to the urban renewal agency to be able to spend on projects and programs. So that revenue stream of the growth is diverted to borrow against in order to fund development projects in the district. This public investment spurs private development, generating additional tax growth that otherwise would not have occurred. And that new revenue is also reinvested into the district. So that lighter blue line that goes up on the graph shows that new public investment and the increased assessed value from that new investment. When the district retires in the future, its property tax growth is returned to the general tax rolls for all of the different taxing districts to enjoy. So the positive outcomes of an urban renewal area are being able to create new economic growth, being able to provide high quality public amenities and infrastructure, additional permanent revenues for public services afterwards. You can see just in this chart the amount of projected new revenues that would occur due to an urban renewal area. And you can see that kind of slight blue line above the dark blue frozen base is the revenues that could be expected if no new investments were made within this area. So it's projected that the urban renewal will have a very dramatic impact on both your community as a whole, but those property tax revenues in the future.
So as we have built this plan from the very beginning, we've really placed it on 3 foundational documents. The Transportation System Plan, which was last adopted in 2021 or last updated in 2021, the Hood River Affordable Housing Strategy adopted in 2022, and the Multi-Jurisdictional Parks, Recreation, and Open Space Plan, which was done in 2020. All of those had extensive public input and engagement, and we really sought to honor what you heard from the community through those plans as we look to implement them. As I said, they all had significant community engagement. Here's a quick list. We also did an audit of the public engagement efforts to see if there were gaps and tried to address some of those in some of the work that we did. Plus, as we plan for the future, we'll be specifically holding some focus groups and some targeted feedback as we start working at the project level. Community engagement that we did that was specific to this process, so building upon all of the plans engagement efforts, was that we held a community open house. It was a virtual open house on May 23rd. We then had that video translated into Spanish. Both the English and Spanish version are in our on our website, available to be viewed. Immediately after that open house, we had an online survey that was open for about 2 weeks. You have seen the comments and results that came from that survey. And then, of course, we've had a very formal process. And of course, before that formal process, you've had many presentations and conversations about this, both as the agency board and as the city council. But some of the formal pieces that have happened in the last 11 months or so, or 9 months or so, has been the agency has met, the Urban Renewal Advisory Committee has addressed this number of times. The taxing districts all received the report, and many of them received presentations from staff, and many of you joined me on those presentations. Planning Commission reviewed it. The County Commission has received 2 presentations, and they will formally review it. And then we are here now, and we will be back to you on August 28th. We'll talk about that in a little bit more detail as we go forward here. So thinking about our projects, we've always had the assumptions that all of the projects will require additional funding, that urban renewal can't do it by itself, but it is a catalyst. We hope that we can use it as matching grants and meet requirements for ODOT, for state housing grants, for state housing tax credits, like we've just received for LIFT funding for 780 Rand Road, federal funds, and then, of course, working with developers to spur infrastructure needs that they will also need to contribute to. Also with this, I want to recognize that the projects that are identified in the plans are also not complete. When we open a street once, we want to open it and put lots of stuff in that street rather than open it many times. So things like sidewalks, water lines, sewer lines, stormwater, all of those pieces we know will be part of these plans. Many of those will be paid by the rates that we apply to those services. Again, some in the capital improvement plan, others paid for through SDCs and other sources. So to really know that while this urban renewal is a major piece of it, it is one piece of a really big puzzle. To dive just really quickly into the plans, because I know you've seen this many times before, the transportation projects, a lot of them are centered on exit 62, including, of course, everybody knows my favorite, the a roundabout at Cascade and Mount Adams. Some extra lanes that would provide a little bit of traffic access and a little bit of calming on Cascade as we approach the future roundabout, and then allow for people to make right turns onto Mount Adams or right turns onto the exit. Those are required by ODOT. And then you can see some of the other things that are listed there are a north-south line that I believe that is West Side Drive from Wine Country to May Street. And then, of course, other opportunities as they come up. I think that our planning department has conversations with interested developers looking at housing and knowing that infrastructure is often a roadblock. And we've heard from you an interest in having those conversations about how we can, how the city can be a partner in spurring the development that we want to see. In housing, we are feeling good success about our 780 Rand Road project, and we are looking to replicate that in real general sense, likely 3 projects that would create possibly up to 100 or 150 units. Maybe could be some combination of rental or owner occupied. We don't exactly know. We want to just start thinking about that. And we want to make sure that we are able to acquire land while land is still affordable, because we know as the area gets developed, that the prices will go up and it will be harder and harder to acquire land for housing. As I think you've heard from some of the folks who made comments earlier, someone talked specifically about Frankton Road. We want to look at paths and parks, sidewalks. We want to make sure that as we develop, we're developing complete and full neighborhoods, not just tracts of housing, not just busy roads, but places where families can walk and enjoy parks and really have that sense of what makes Hood River a quality of life, enjoyable place to be. So really want to see all of these things tied together. And so I think this includes a number of trails listed there, and then land acquisition for probably 3 parks that would be kind of the neighborhood parks, 2 to 4 acres each. Elaine, can I turn it back to you for the finances?
Sure. So the finances are shown here and split out by the different project types. So you can see that the total amount of funds allocated to projects and administration is about $93.7 million, with over half of that allocated to transportation, so $51 million. Housing is $23.3 million, parks and trails 11.7, administration 6.5 million, and contingency and finance fees 1,200,000. These are estimates within the plan, and as you do your annual budgeting and as this plan progresses and maybe you get some funding from one source and other funding from another source, some of those could be adjusted in the future if they need to be adjusted. You aren't compelled to spend just in these buckets, but at this point in time, this is the anticipation of where that funding would be spent.
Thank you.
So the potential TIF, which stands for tax increment finance or tax increment funding revenue, the net tax increment funds would be projected to be $175,600,000. Net tax increment funds includes any interest paid on long-term debt. By statutory definition, your maximum indebtedness does not include that interest on debt. So that is the difference between the maximum indebtedness number of $146,700,000. Maximum indebtedness is the controlling feature of any urban renewal plan. Once you have committed or indebted yourself to that amount of funding, either through spending on pay-as-you-go or spending through long-term bonds, you no longer can spend money on projects and programs, but you can collect money to be able to pay off that debt. This amount of funding is estimated to be over a 27-year time frame, and it is not available at day one. It is available over the lifetime of the district, so that full time frame of urban renewal. That number on the last slide of the 146 million, when we bring that back to today's dollars, it allows for that $93.7 million of project revenue. So when we looked at allocating project costs and the number of projects that could be done, this is a figure that we looked at to allocate those revenues. In this plan, we're looking at the amount of revenue in the first 5 years of about 20.5 billion, years 6 through 10 of 20.7 million, 11 through 15, 21.1 million, 16 through 20, 11.1 million, 21, 25, 16.2 million. And then on the projections that we used, years 26, and it's really only half of a year of year 27, about $4 million. These show the projected taxing district impacts over that time period. So Hood River County, the projected impacts would be a little over 22 million. 911 Communications District, a little under 9 million. City of Hood River, 43.5 million. Port of Hood River, around 500,000. Hood River Parks and Rec, 5.5 million. Hood River County Transit District, 1.1 million. Library District, 6.1 million. Westside Fire and Rescue, 212,000. Those are all direct impacts. The next three are education districts. Those districts are indirect because they are all funded through state funding formulas. So the Columbia Gorge Community College impact to that state funding formula would be $4.25 million. Community colleges are funded based on classes that students take. So the impact of urban renewal is not a direct impact on their budget. It is an indirect impact. For the Hood River School District and the Columbia Gorge Education Service District, they are funded through the state school fund on a per pupil basis. So that per pupil basis does not go down because of urban renewal in your community or urban renewal anywhere statewide. The legislature establishes that per pupil funding ratio and then finds the funding either through permanent rate taxes, which is what urban renewal is, or through other sources to put together the amount of money to fund the full state school fund. The city received two different letters with comments and recommendations. The Hood River County Library District sent a letter with specific recommendations. Excuse me. Those recommendations were: number one, to use a funding criteria other than permanent rate taxes. Number two, to reduce the library contribution as they are unduly burdened. Number three, to provide a legal determination that urban renewal is lawful. Number four, they request a guaranteed multiplier for the $6 million from the library revenue or some type of guarantee of reimbursement of any amount paid that does not result in increased revenue under the existing library levy. And number five, the Hood River County Library District Board is open to further discussions with the City Council about the Westside Urban Renewal District project. According to state statute, you are required to accept, reject, or modify any of those written recommendations from any taxing district. So these are the 5 specific recommendations from the library district. And as you consider your ordinance, you will need to look at each of those 5 recommendations and make a decision to either accept, reject, or modify each of those recommendations. I believe we provided in your packet some information on analysis of those and recommendation on how you might address that. The Columbia Area Transit District also sent a letter. Their letter was not specific recommendations, but more general information and input. So they wanted to note that they primarily depend on property tax revenues to fulfill match requirements for state and federal grants. And they understood that you worked with them on this, but if they wanted to note that if additional urban renewal areas were created, or if the district's estimated total revenue is not accurate, that could impact the grants that the district is able to commit to, which improve or expand services or contribute to additional mobility options available in the region in the future. They also request early notification of any future urban renewal district to allow for better financial planning. They note that they are concerned about the deprioritization of community projects that take steps to reduce single occupancy vehicle trips by encouraging active transportation. They also say that they support the City of Hood River in seeking future state and federal assistance for large infrastructure projects and are happy to assist with advocacy and creating letters of support. The transit-oriented development toolkit was created as part of the recently adopted Hood River County Transportation District Transit Master Plan and is a great resource for developers. So they wanted to make sure to note that when incorporating transit within their development. And then they also wanted clarification on the Cascade Avenue project. So we are at these final steps. We have, I remember when we first signed this contract, I was asked by the former mayor whether we really could get this done in this time frame. And I said, yes, we can. But we will need to do it with your assistance. And here we are doing it within the time frame as noted. So the remaining steps are for the County Board of Commissioners to consider approval of the plan. Because there are properties that are unincorporated, they must also adopt or approve the plan, and they are scheduled to review that on August 21st. And then you have your first reading of the ordinance tonight, and then on August 28th are scheduled to have the second reading and vote. And if adopted at that point, the district actually begins in January 1st of 2024. So as you've taken public testimony, I'm not sure where you're going from here, but as you consider the ordinance, we will have to consider the two taxing district letters.
Great. So I think next steps are to stop here, answer any questions, and then as Elaine said, we will need to go through the, and make a decision to accept, reject, or modify the recommendations from the taxing districts.
Thank you. Let's start online. Questions, Gladys? Or Tim?
Nothing from me, Mayor. I think the presentation was very clear. I think that we've been updated regularly all along. So the information seems in line with what we've been presented before. And I think addressing the recommendations would be the next step from the library district and CAT.
Thank you, Tim.
Thank you.
Gladys? Maybe she'll come back. Grant? Oh, hi, Gladys. Okay. Yeah, you're muted.
She can't hear us.
I can't hear you. Elaine, can you hear me?
I can hear you, but it looks
Good.
like Councilor Rivera is saying she
Gladys
can't hear you
cannot.
or she can't speak. Do you have a chat function?
Gladys, you're muted on my screen. All right, we'll keep working on that. Grant?
I didn't have any questions now.
Martin?
No other questions.
Megan?
I think I have more comment than a question, but I did just want to publicly address. So the library talked about, their 39 cents per thousand, about 6 million over the life of the grant, and their letter talked about the port being 33 cents per thousand, but only $500,000. And I did look this up on the port's website because I was like, well, that doesn't make sense. It should be the equivalent proportion for everyone. And the port has a little over 3 cents per thousand is their tax rate. So the $500,000 is the equivalent. Their tax rate's about 10% of the libraries. Their cost to this district is about 10% of the libraries. So I did just want to call that out publicly since the letter's in the public packet. But I don't think I have any questions on the presentation or the district we've been talking about for this long. So thank you.
Also, no questions. I'm interested in going, at what time shall we go through the two letters?
I think if we've got any other questions or thoughts, and then I think Elaine and I can walk you through that process. Is that right, Elaine? We can do that tonight?
I think we do it tonight on your first reading so that when you have the second reading, you have either accepted, rejected, or modified those, and you can read and vote.
Great. Gladys, I can see you very clearly.
Can you hear me?
Yes, now.
Okay, all right. I was having some technical, no
all right, I'm
questions
glad
for
you're
me,
back.
but no questions for me, but I do want to address the letters that we received.
Great, great. So I think that's where we are. Let's work through the letters.
Fantastic. So I think I will go ahead and share those two slides again, because I think that gives us a good just outline of what their recommendations were, and maybe we can just go through them one by one. So Elaine, if you want to.
No, I think that's a great way to approach it. So
great. Let me just share that. Am I sharing the right screen? Great.
Yes.
And before we start, I also want to acknowledge that the West Side Rural Fire Protection District also sent us just an email. It's part of your packet. They wanted just to acknowledge that they had been consulted and that they did not approve, endorse or oppose the district. They just wanted that on the record. And I want to thank Elaine and her team, because they worked extra hard with West Side to understand what the impact might be for them, because they're in a kind of a funny situation of, as we annex, we have an intergovernmental agreement with them. So they received an extra analysis, so they really understood what would happen.
So I think it might be helpful if I walk through these, because some of them you have the ability to do and some you do not. So on number one, use a funding criteria other than permanent rate taxes. Urban renewal uses permanent rate taxes. That's a statutory authority. We have no authority to use a different funding criteria. So that is what we have in this tool. And we may wish it were different, but this is what we have. So we cannot do a funding criteria other than permanent rate taxes. So my recommendation on that is to reject that, acknowledging, I mean, I talked with your city manager about this, acknowledging we understand this money comes from the other taxing districts, and we understand it. It does impact them. So I'm not trying to be rude in this analysis. I'm just trying to say what your authority is or isn't. And unfortunately, the words accept, reject, and modify sound harsh, but those are the words that are in the statute for your choices here. So on number one, I would recommend that you reject, because you don't have authority to use a different funding criteria if you're going to use urban renewal.
Let's kind of work into this slowly.
Yeah.
Is anybody unwilling to reject the first one? Nope. Let's move on.
Thank you. Number two, reduce the library contribution as they are unduly burdened. Urban renewal also, the way it is structured is every taxing district is impacted by what their permanent rate levy amount is. And we are not allowed to say, well, we really don't want to impact one district, or we really don't want to impact the other district. The way urban renewal law is written, it impacts everybody equally according to what their permanent rate levy is. So you do not have the capacity to reduce the library contribution formula for the way urban renewal works. So our recommendation is you would also reject.
This is a hard one for me. I was, as some of you know, on the founding board of the library district. Like, that's an important thing. It is a big chunk for them. I don't know if there are other things that we could do to soften the blow. You know, the city could give them money or something like that, but let's just keep moving along. Is there anyone unwilling to reject number two? All right, moving on.
Number three, provide a legal determination that urban renewal is lawful. And yes, ORS 457 does allow for urban renewal. It does allow for the division of permanent rate taxes. You do have, I mean, on any of these, you do have your city attorney here. So definitely Mr. Kearns can weigh in on any of this. But if you look at ORS 457, it sets up this mechanism for urban renewal and sets up how that financing works. So I don't think you need a separate legal determination that it is lawful, because it exists within the statute. So my recommendation is to reject that recommendation.
Is anyone unwilling to reject number 3? Moving on.
Request a guaranteed multiplier for the 6 million from the library revenue or some type of guarantee of reimbursement of any amount paid that does not result in increased revenue under the existing library levy. Urban renewal funds specifically can be used for capital improvements. Urban renewal funds cannot be used to reimburse a district or give a guaranteed multiplier or guarantee them some kind of revenue. So this funding source doesn't have the capacity to meet that request. So my recommendation again is to reject.
Anyone unwilling to reject number 4? Moving on.
The Hood River County Library District Board is open to further discussions with the City Council about the West Side Urban Renewal District project. And I think you accept, that wasn't really a recommendation, but a comment. And I think you accept and acknowledge that you are quite willing to always work with the library district on anything that relates between the two of you. So I would accept that as a recommendation.
I'm going to change the script, so keep listening. Is anyone unwilling to accept number 5? Moving on. Is this going okay?
I think this is perfect.
Perfect. Thank you, Elaine.
Big word. So these were a little different. They weren't specific recommendations. They were input. And I did write a memorandum on those to you about the input. And I wrote it, as also the accept, reject, or modify, just because I didn't not want to acknowledge that they were providing what they might have thought was a recommendation. So I don't know if your attorney feels differently, but what I had provided you and what was set out in the ordinance actually looks at each one of these and also allows you to accept, reject, or modify, even though they weren't an actual recommendation. So number 1, it basically says that they would like to be able to have more input if you're going to create a new urban renewal area in the future so that they can look at their budget. And I think you would accept that recommendation for analysis in the future, just as you have done now. So it's my recommendation on number 1 is to accept.
Is anyone unwilling to accept number 1? Moving on.
So the second input was they request early notification of any future urban renewal district to allow for better financial planning. And I think that the City Council could accept that recommendation, that request, really.
Is anyone unwilling to accept number 2? Great.
Number 3, it's a comment and then an offer of support within the same statement. So they're concerned about deprioritization of community projects that take steps to reduce single occupancy vehicle trips. And they also say that they support the city in seeking future state and federal assistance. And I think that the City Council can accept the opportunity to work in partnership and appreciates their willingness to assist with advocacy and creating letters of support in the future.
Is anyone unwilling to accept number 3? Moving on.
The Transit-Oriented Development Toolkit was created as part of the recently adopted Hood River County Transportation District, and it's a great resource. And they offer to work with people, and I think the City Council accepts the offer of the CAT to encourage development with walking, biking, and transit as priorities and strives to work with developers on using the Hood River County Transportation District Transit Master Plan as a basis for their transportation planning.
Is anybody unwilling to accept number 4?
I'd like to ask staff whether this point, does this change the planning approval process, or is it just pointing to a tool set? Would the latter, I would hip to, but the former, I wouldn't be.
I don't think you cannot unilaterally make a legislative change in this hearing to the zoning code. However, certainly the language is set up to, to send to developers when considering, that is something to offer, whether it's a TOD project, incorporation of CAT into the pre-app. There's certainly, I don't see anything here that all of a sudden becomes binding as a legislative, but open up opportunity for discussion, especially this will be relevant along Cascade Avenue. So.
I'm getting to that. Is anyone unwilling to accept number 4? Moving on.
And the final one was the CIT would like clarification on the Cascade Avenue project. And the response that your city staff gave me is that the city will use the MIG Cascade Avenue Design Refinement Plan as its foundation when it begins its planning for Cascade improvements. This planning effort will include public engagement, and the city invites Columbia Area Transit to participate as a subject matter expert and stakeholder, and accepting the recommendation.
Anybody unwilling to accept number 5? Boom. What's next, Abigail?
I think those were all of the pieces we needed. Is there anything else, Elaine, to finish this up? And then I think you'll have your first reading today.
No, other than I don't know your process, but I think you have to read the ordinance or read it by title or something there. So I'm sure you know what to do.
Thank you, Elaine, so much for being our expert and being such an expert.
Thank you.
Great, so do we go to the next slide, or are we taking a motion?
I just have one,
Go ahead.
one thing, and before we move and read ordinance, do anything like that, just edited, I talked with Abigail about in the second paragraph of section E, on page 22.
Can you let me catch up, please, or page 22 of the document?
Yeah, the one we're just reading.
Can you guys talk into your mic, please? I can't hear you.
Sure.
Yeah, I can't hear either.
Mic's on, should be. The first sentence of the second paragraph just says, accept this recommendation. I was talking to Abigail and talked about just striking that sentence because it is unnecessary and unneeded.
I think we can slightly reword. This is in point E. We can reword that a little bit. The other one say the city council accepts the offer. This one just starts with accept this recommendation. Finesse that a bit.
Great, that seems minor enough that we could trust you to make that correction.
Great.
Yeah. Thanks, Grant. So I just noticed we're on slide 22 of 24. Will we see 2 more slides, or we're done with this?
Yep, we had done these slides. I just brought them back.
Okay, great. We're back.
Yeah.
So we are actually we're still in the public hearing. The script got a little funny this time. It was sort of last minute, so stand by. We took the public testimony. We heard the staff report. Should I close the public hearing before or after we make a motion?
I'm looking to the city attorney for that, but I think you can close the hearing.
Yeah, that feels right too.
Yeah, go ahead and close the public testimony portion of the hearing and roll into deliberation and decision.
Perfect, thanks, Dan. The public hearing on ordinance 2077 is now closed. The city council will now deliberate. Okay. Now, discussion, deliberation. Does anybody have anything to speak to before someone makes a motion? Mark?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I'm certainly sensitive to and sympathetic to the shared pain and concerns of the other districts, but feel that, this is really a critical tool to the benefit of the community. So we hear you, it hurts the city as well. It just check so many nice boxes of things we want to do. So I just wanted to make that note.
I dug into this a little bit and have three things I'd like to say. One is I saw the per year cost to the library district, and like in the first year, it's like $12,000. So there's a little bit of a hockey stick on the $6 million thing. Secondly is that the foregone, and this, I'll probably get this wrong, but I believe it. And I'm looking at Chris, the foregone revenue makes assumptions about the rate of growth. So the foregone revenue includes revenue they're foregoing that is revenue that is caused by the expedited development caused by the district. So it's a little bit of it emphasizes the negative impact because it blames the district for creating the value that otherwise would have not occurred. So the argument might be with no district, it wouldn't be 6 million, it would be a smaller number. So I'm sure that this is typically the way the math is done, but that was important to me when I looked at that. The final thing is we are closing this other urban renewal district. So that's money that will go to the library that's not included in this foregone revenue page. Those are my three things. Tim.
Yeah, I agree with what you were saying there, Mayor. I think that that point, if we could, again, we're going to accept the recommendation to discuss this further with the library district. If we could take some time and make the effort to perhaps help them understand some of those fine points associated with the urban renewal district. I think that would be good because it is, our community loves the library, right? It's very important to our community. And I agree with Mark, there's a certain amount of pain that goes around, but I think that there is some clarifications that we can do with them that perhaps will clear up some of this.
Thank you, Tim. Other deliberation? Megan.
I mean, I'm basically going to just second all of you, but I think certainly the library was the most vocal, but it's important to acknowledge that there is a cost to all of our overlapping agencies minus education, given their funding model. But I think I am going to, we as a board, I think, and I think me personally, this is one of the few funding mechanisms we have available, and the larger community benefit both over the next 25 years with the district, and then after the district's done with the reimbursement back, or I don't know what it's called, but the larger amount of money going back to all of the overlapping agencies. I do, from a community-minded aspects of what's in the best interest, this has pain in the short term that I think has benefits in the long term. So I do just want to publicly acknowledge that we are making that choice.
Thank you, Megan.
I want to jump right on that. Good job, Counselor. Very well said. The need for this to happen, for this sort of investment in our community that's going to benefit those that are going to come after we do. It's really important that we do so and that we move in this direction and completely recognize that there are some challenges to this as well, especially to the library.
Further comments? Grant.
I agree with my fellow counselors and share all taxing districts' frustration about the general idiosyncrasies within the Oregon tax code. And I'm more than glad to get a coffee sometime and discuss it with anyone from any taxing district anytime.
I will just say that I noticed, like each agenda item has which of the 6 council goals does this agenda item address? And I've probably missed it, but this is the first one I remember seeing with 6 checkboxes.
That's right.
Like this is just what we say we want to be doing. All right, so we have it under city recorder later, but I think at this point it would be time for
I move to hear ordinance number 2077 on tonight's agenda for the first time by title only with the mentioned edits that we talked about.
moved by Paulson.
I will
I
second.
second.
I'll give it to Gladys.
By Rivera, tie goes to the Zoom. Second by Rivera. Any further discussion? We're moving to put it on the city recorder. I'm sorry, help me know what we're doing.
I believe you're moving
But is it
to,
a roll call now? Or are we moving?
no,
it to the?
when you get to the city recorder.
Okay,
You're moving to read it by title only, and at the city recorder,
Great.
that's when we will do the reading.
thank you. All in favor?
Yes.
Aye.
Opposed? Chair votes aye, motion passes. Thank you. All right, moving on to the consent agenda. Gladys, do you have something to say on this?
Yes, I'd like to have the OLCC taken off and voted separately, please.
We shall. So I would entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda as amended.
So moved.
Moved by Paulson,
Second.
second by Saunders. Discussion. All in favor?
Yes.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Chair votes aye. Next item, OLCC permit application from the Hood River Hotel. Any discussion? I think, any discussion? I would entertain a motion.
I will move. We approve the OLCC permit application for the Hood River Hotel.
Moved by Saunders,
Second.
second by Zan Miller. Discussion. Okay, so we're gonna go slow here because I think this is what we want to have happen. All in favor?
Aye.
Yes.
Opposed?
Abstain.
Abstained by Rivera. Chair votes aye, motion passes. Thank you. Action items. Jim. Thank you for your service. Like we said, come at 9 o'clock.
Yeah. Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of council. Thanks for your time tonight on the agenda. I am Jim Winterbottom with Hood River Garbage. And I'm here before you tonight with proposed rate increase, as I historically do annually. This year was probably the most impact we've seen from a consumer price index standpoint. The number we were using was 8.67% for the West Coast benchmark. We try to remain sensitive to the ratepayers, and we know that any increase has an impact on them. So we asked for 85% of the CPI, and this year that comes to an average of 7.37%. The Wasco County landfill has had that increase since January 1st. Both on the tip fee as well as the hazardous household waste tax. Some of the other large items that are impacting us from a CPI impact are healthcare, truck and equipment repair, fuels, hydraulic oil, tires, DEF. Not to mention just the hardships in trying to get parts to repair our trucks. For a customer here in Hood River that has the 35-gallon trash cart service, they currently are paying $23.77 a month. The increase would be $1.75 per month or 40 cents per week, taking it to $25.52 a month. A customer that may have the larger 65-gallon trash cart in their ensemble would be looking at an increase of 48 cents a week or $2.10 per month. One of our commercial customers that might have a 1.5 yard dumpster, if you will, one that's serviced once a week would see a monthly increase of $10.44 or $2.41 per pickup. And if council has any questions, I would certainly like to entertain them.
Thank you, Jim. Think of all those snowy days and whatnot where you guys are out there getting it done. What an important piece of keeping things rolling smoothly. Please pass on our gratitude to the service. Questions for Jim? Gladys.
Thank you, Mr. Winterbottom, for being here. Appreciate all that you do and your staff. Feel like every year I ask you the same question. For those who do have financial hardships, what sort of support is available for them, especially with the increase?
So there's two avenues for that. One being for 85 and older, they get free service. The only caveat to that is they have to renew annually. So we know that the person that's getting the free service is still in the household. And the other low income, I believe it's $3 a month off of their bill. And our office folks are able to set people up and point them in the right directions so we can credit that amount for them.
Thank you.
Other comments, questions for Jim? I would entertain a motion.
I would move we accept the proposed rate increase from Waste Connections.
By Saunders,
Second.
second by Paulson. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Yes.
Opposed? Chair votes aye, motion passes. Thank you, Jim.
Thanks very much.
Co- Collective bargaining.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm pleased to be here tonight and present the collective bargaining agreement with our local firefighter union for your consideration. I wanted to note I have a mistake in the cover sheet. It says fiscal impact is XXX. And they didn't have a number for you, but I got it on this Post-it. The fiscal impact of, because we're, if we sign this tonight, we now need to retro it back to July 1st, and that amount is $6,664.79. So I apologize. That's for since July 1st to now. So that's, yeah, that's probably like 7 weeks, well, or whatever it turns out to be with the next payroll. So I apologize for that. I want to thank the city staff who are involved in this, and particularly our union leadership, our fire chief, Monica Morris, who's left the city, our labor attorney, myself, and then our fire union leadership really had a very collegial and collaborative discussion, and I'm just really proud of the work that we did. So you have a motion in front of you, but before we do that, the last remaining person in the room is our Fire Lieutenant Jeremy Cervantes, who's also the union president, and I want to offer him the chance to give any comments he might wish to give.
Hello, council. I just wanted to say that it was an honor to work with Abigail and Chief during negotiations. As you probably remember, or maybe not remember, the last time we did negotiations, it was 18 months to get a new contract right about there. And we did it in 6 sessions. And I think that shows what type of leadership you guys have under you, and how well things went. And I want to say that Abigail and Chief Leonard were outside the box thinkers during this process, which helped us get to where we are today with the labor agreement in front of you. I also wanted to say thank you for your continued support with what we do. And I also wanted to say thank you for allowing Chief to go out for the grants that he has obtained recently. Knowing that that's going to be a huge impact for the citizens of Hood River, and knowing that it's going to take a burden off our daily workload as well by adding a 16th person due to the grant on top of the additional grant funding for wildland season. So I just want to say thank you for constantly giving us the support and providing Leonard and Abigail an avenue to seek additional funding so that we can better serve our community.
Super. Please pass along our gratitude for all the service. It's important and life-saving and sometimes dangerous work, and it's really important. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you.
Do we have an action?
Yes.
You have a motion in your packet.
I move to approve the collective bargaining agreement between the city of Hood River and IFF Local 3256 and authorize the city manager to sign and implement the agreement.
I second.
Second by Rivera. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Chair votes aye, motion passes. City record.
Alrighty, Your Honor, I'd like to entertain a motion for first reading of ordinance 2077 by title only.
I move we read ordinance 2077 West Side District for the first time by title only.
Moved by Saunders.
Second.
Second by Paulson. Discussion. Roll call, please.
Counselor Saunders,
Yes.
Counselor Coonihan,
Aye.
Counselor Polson,
Aye.
Counselor Rivera,
Aye.
Counselor Zan Miller,
Yes.
Your Honor.
Aye.
Ordinance 2077, an ordinance making certain determinations and findings relating to and approving the West Side Urban Renewal Plan and directing that notice of approval to be published.
Ordinance 2077 has been read by title only for the first time. We will have the second reading very soon
Correct, at your next meeting.
at our next meeting. City manager comments.
Yeah, I have just a couple quick comments for you. I'm not sure if Chief Damian is online or not. I'll give him a minute to come up if he is. But I want to mention that the temperatures are very warm and want to be aware that McCack has, there are some cooling shelters. Most of them are the public libraries in our area. So Hood River County Library opened their normal hours, and those are probably the places we would direct people who are looking for cooling. But also McCack provides what they call cooling bundles. And these contain water, Gatorade, snacks, held fan, sunscreen, lip balm, other pieces, and they're available from the McCack office, which here in Hood River is on 606 State Street. So if you know someone who needs that, or if you wish to make a referral. So want to be very aware of that. And I see Chief Damian is on the screen, so I'm going to turn to him and see if he can share some fire-related updates.
In regards to the Lucas device, if you guys recall during the budget committee meeting, this was requested and it was approved. This is the device that does automatic CPR compressions for us. A ton of benefits. I won't go into all those since I covered those in the budget committee, but we did receive this in early July. We start training here shortly and it should be on our ambulance to go out and start serving the public. So we'll have a press release, some pictures, and when I know of some training dates, if there's interest in the council, I'll make sure I let Abigail know those dates to share those with you.
Thanks, Chief.
Thanks, Chief. I also want to note that we have hired our 16th firefighter that Lieutenant Cervantes talked about. His name is Carl Smiley, and he started just a couple weeks ago. So if you haven't met Carl, certainly stop by, or you'll see him around. Yeah, excited. And then my last little update for you was I put on here a note about Powerdale water rights and a possible letter. I'm a little premature in that, but I wanted to just give you a quick update that a little history. The Powerdale Dam, I think, began in 1923. If you were here in the area, you remember that it was significantly damaged in 2006 and was finally removed in 2010. The Oregon Water Resources Department has issued a proposed final order that the water rights attached to that, to the Powerdale Dam, be converted to what's called an in-stream right. Now this might affect us in that the city has water rights as well. So the proposed final order would make the new in-stream water rights junior to the rights of the city and other water rights holders who existed before 1999. So Farmers Irrigation pulled together our water users for a meeting as we kind of all learn about this. Wanted to let you know that we're coordinating with the other districts who have water rights in the area. And at your next meeting, might bring you a letter either for us to draft or to sign on to, just expressing our what our feelings are about the city's water rights and how they relate to this proposed final order. So, and I'm going to just look at Councilor Saunders if she has anything to add, simply because she is such a water expert and I really rely on her knowledge.
Well, one, good job.
Thank you.
And yeah, no, what Abigail said is great. I, with my other hat on as well, this is something that has a potentially large impact on the entire Hood River Basin. But it is still developing. There's a 60-day comment period that just started really recently. So still figuring out some things, but I think we'll be back. But I am outside of this and in this, I'm always happy to talk water rights with anyone. So if you want to get a coffee, I can bore you to tears.
Anything else, Abigail?
Those are my updates. Thank you.
All right, committee reports. We'll start on screen. Gladys, committees?
Nothing from me.
Tim?
Nothing from me, Mayor.
Megan?
Nothing.
Mark?
A couple little things. I don't know if I said it last meeting that I got booted from the MCED board.
What?
For cause.
It isn't, it's not as dramatic as that. The agreement is that Hood River and Cascade Lock swap back and forth, and Cascade, and I had been the Hood River person for cities of Hood River County, and Cascade Locks, and I think it's good, said that they want to be part of that group, so they're going to take over. And so in 2 years, we'll get to appoint someone again. With that hole in my schedule, I am now on the Gorge Technology Alliance board. I don't think that doesn't impact us here very much, but I'll tell you the fun bits anyway. And then Visit Hood River has their every other month meeting on Wednesday, so I'll be at that.
Grant?
Oh, let's see. What week was it? We went on a hike in a tunnel. 3 of us did. A week ago, I guess. I don't know what time it is anymore. So we took a look at the new Mitchell Point Tunnel. It's being worked on. It'll get done soon. Next year, if I remember my dates correctly. There's also going to be for the new part of the Viento path, the historic highway trail. There's going to be a ribbon cutting and opening for that section at the second weekend of next month. I think it's September 10th, if I remember correctly. So yeah, we went and did that, and that was nice. We had the meeting here in the regional ACT meeting here in Hood River after that at the Best Western. The Zoom technology didn't work, but we did most everything else. The only thing that meet group didn't get to was a presentation on the new bridge and bridge authority, which is unfortunate because it would have been helpful for ODOT commissioners to hear all about that new entity and everything going on with that. So that was rescheduled to the next Region ACT meeting. Yeah, that's it for committees. Aside from that, we also had a little brunch or breakfast at the History Museum.
Great. Let's stay on you for council comment. Anything?
No.
Zan Miller.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that got to join the ODOT folks at the tunnel, and nod a hat to Grant, who helped to organize the Hood River meeting here and was obviously well connected to the group that is in our best interests on the tour. So thank you.
Yeah, I joined Grant and Mark at the Hood River History Museum for a nice breakfast. I think they're just trying to work on building community relationships up, which is of course something we're also trying to do. So I think that was a nice first foray into that. And it'd been a couple of years since I'd been in the museum, certainly pre-COVID. So it is looking good. You should check it out.
Thanks. Tim.
Thanks, Mayor. I think I would just like to briefly acknowledge, since we're moving into the final stages of approving the West Side Urban Renewal District, the efforts of Will Norris, who was instrumental in getting this thing off the ground, and also Mayor McBride, Councilor Mehta, and Councilor Haney, who participated in the process. So just a nod to those folks.
Thanks for noting that. It's important to do that. Anything else, Tim?
That's it, Mayor.
Gladys.
Thank you for noting that, Councilor Cunahan. That's important. I had the opportunity, like Grant mentioned, to join him and Counselor Zan Miller on the Mitchell Point Tunnel. That was exciting, just to get a sneak peek and also to connect with other elected officials, even from the Portland area, which was really nice. And got to meet some actual ODOT folks in person. Thank you, Counselor Polson, for coordinating those efforts.
I attended a small amount of the Oregon Mayors Association. We had 85 mayors, as I mentioned. And Mayor Kate and I did a couple of urban renewal tours, and there was a lot of oohing and eyeing, and we in fact have used it to great success and in fact have a very cute town. We showed them the library in Oak Street and the Wacoma Hotel, and then we got back on the bus and showed them the waterfront, and it's fun to see other people see all the things that we have. Anything else for the good of the order? We are adjourned. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all. Good night.
Thanks, Paul.
Thank you, everybody.
Senate speak for that council recap.
Oh, no.